Hello everyone, and welcome back to Crime Stories for Sleep. I'm Robert, and before we begin, I'd like to ask for a little support. Subscribe, leave a like, and if you do, let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. These may seem like small gestures, but they are essential to help the channel grow and allow me to keep bringing you these stories every night. Now, lower the volume just a bit, get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let us dive together into tonight's first story. The old farmhouse stood like a skeleton against the bruised South Carolina sky, a forgotten relic, swallowed whole by the creeping woods off Scuffletown Road. Its windows stared out like vacant eyes, while its porch sagged like a weary mouth, groaning under the crushing weight of decay. For years, this place had drawn teenagers seeking the forbidden thrill of secret parties. Its walls had echoed with laughter and the sharp clink of bottles. But on the night of October 26th, 2016, the house harbored a secret far darker than teenage rebellion. A thick, suffocating silence had settled over everything, heavy with a horror that would soon spill out and stain the quiet community of Simpsonville forever. Deep within the house, down in the damp basement that reeked of earth and neglect, two of Katie Blavelt's friends had followed a desperate hunch. The air hung cold and stagnant around them. Their flashlight beams sliced through the oppressive darkness, dancing across discarded beer cans and graffiti-scarred walls. Then the light caught something in the center of the room. A rectangular concrete box, strange and utilitarian amid all of the surrounding squalor. As they crept closer, a shape within the box slowly resolved itself. A human form, unnaturally folded and crammed into those cold confines like a discarded doll. The frantic 911 call that followed came out as a choked, terrified whisper. A sound that marked the end of a desperate search and the beginning of an agonizing quest for justice. "We found my friend Katie dead in the house," the voice stammered, cracking with grief too fresh, too raw to comprehend. When investigators arrived, the scene that greeted them looked like something from a horror movie. 22-year-old Catherine Katie Blavelt, a woman her mother lovingly described as a 5'1" free spirit, a teeny little thing full of sunshine, had been brutalized. The cause of death was a single savage stab wound to the neck, inflicted with such violent force that the blade had snapped off and remained lodged within her. A final cruel punctuation mark on a life cut tragically short. Her body had been dragged through a basement window and dumped unceremoniously in that trash-strewn box. As her mother, Patty Piver, would later say, her voice hollowed by unimaginable loss, "I was totally empty inside. She did not deserve to be murdered." The investigation immediately zeroed in on one man, her estranged husband, John Tufton Blavelt. He was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army, a recruiter whose decorated uniform and stories of deployment in Iraq had once made him a figure of admiration in this small city of 20,000. When investigators Keith Moorcraft and Cheryl Schofield went to his home to deliver the devastating news, they weren't met with the shock and devastation of a grieving husband. Instead, they encountered a chilling, unsettling calm. As Moorcraft later recounted, John didn't ask normal questions like, "Where did you find her?" "How did she die?" He seemed unsurprised, almost annoyed by their presence. When he spotted their recording device, his only real question wasn't about his murdered wife, but about himself. "Am I being charged with a crime?" In that moment, a cold certainty settled deep in the investigators' bones. This was their man. But just as their case was taking shape, John Blavelt, a man trained in combat and survival, simply vanished. And he wasn't alone. With him was his new girlfriend, a 17-year-old high school student named Hannah Thompson. The hunt had begun. The story of Katie and John Blavelt didn't begin with violence, but with the quiet promise of small-town romance. They met in 2014, just yards from John's recruiting office at a sub shop where Katie worked. She was 20. He was 26. To Katie's family, he seemed like the embodiment of honor, a man willing to sacrifice for his country. He was handsome, charismatic, and appeared to have, as a friend would later put it, all his ducks in a row. Katie, with her infectious laugh and deep passion for animals, was completely smitten. "She's lovable, caring, funny," her mother said. "Who wouldn't fall in love with her?" John, the larger-than-life public face of the Army, convinced Katie to enlist. She felt proud to follow in his footsteps. But her military dreams crumbled after just 2 months when a spinal issue led to a medical discharge. Despite this crushing setback, their relationship only deepened. Then one day, Katie stunned her family with a shocking announcement. She says, "Oh, by the way," Patty Piver recalled, "me and John got married today, and I'm in shock." They had slipped away to the courthouse, a swift, unceremonious union that left her family deeply unsettled. They had never warmed to John, finding him distant and completely uninterested in getting to know them. Their unease would soon prove to be a dark premonition. The honeymoon was over almost before it began. They were supposed to build a life together in John's 4-bedroom home in Fountain Inn, a neighboring town. Katie dreamed of filling that house with family, with the joyful laughter of children. But the only kids who filled the house were the teenagers John invited over. It became a notorious party house, a regular hangout for students from Hillcrest High School, where John often worked as a recruiter. Ally Somerville, a friend of Cat Eyes, who was only 16 at the time, painted a picture of endless partying. "We were just smoking weed all day, every day," she remembered. There was alcohol, too, all of it provided by the U.S. Army recruiter these kids looked up to as their hero. Katie's dream house had turned into her worst nightmare. The non-stop partying wore her down, and she finally told John it had to end. But as Katie and John grew further apart, another figure stepped in to fuel their growing conflict: Hannah Thompson. Hannah couldn't stand Katie. Investigator Schofield would later observe that as Katie pulled away, Hannah moved closer to John, becoming completely devoted to him, ready to do whatever he wanted. The tension became unbearable. After barely 3 months of marriage, Katie packed up and left. Hannah didn't waste a single moment. She moved straight into John's bedroom. The mask of the honorable soldier was starting to slip. In February 2016, Hannah's father grew worried. He hadn't seen his 17-year-old daughter in 2 weeks, so he called the police. When officers showed up at Bloveld's house, he wouldn't come out. Instead, he ordered the teenagers inside to lock all the doors. What followed was a tense standoff, with armed officers surrounding the home of an Iraq War veteran. "John Blauvelt, come out of the house with your hands up," they shouted. Inside, Ally Somerville cowered in fear. There were weapons drawn and everything, she would later recall. John finally gave up and was arrested, charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. His polished soldier's image was replaced with a mugshot. "He's the exact opposite of what everybody thought he was," Patty Piver said, the harsh truth finally coming to light. On the day of his arrest, Katie revealed an even more chilling secret to police. A month before, during a heated argument, John had pressed a gun to her head. He was going to kill her, her stepsister, Jennifer Piver remembered. And he'd threatened the whole family too. This revelation brought domestic violence charges and a restraining order against John Blauvelt. It was the ultimate betrayal. The Department of the Army suspended him from recruiting duties, slashed his pay, and stuck him in a tiny back office while they investigated. An investigation that could destroy his career forever. He was livid, and he blamed Katie for all of it. He blamed her for destroying his life. Jennifer Piver said his rage wasn't something he kept to himself. He was loud about it, telling friends over and over that he was going to kill Katie. He said that she ruined his military career. That's all he's ever wanted to do in life, Ally Somerville testified. "You destroy my career, I'm going to destroy you." Nobody believed he'd actually follow through. But as autumn leaves began falling in October 2016, John Blauvelt had become a man consumed by revenge, with a grudge, a plan, and a target. Katie had moved back in with her mother and was preparing to file for divorce, living under the constant weight of a threat she couldn't escape. The only reason she ever returned to the house she'd shared with John was to take care of her dog, Jupiter. Every time she went, her mother was terrified something terrible would happen. On October 24th, 2016, Katie left her job at PetSmart and disappeared. Frantic calls went straight to voicemail. Her mother, gripped by the fear she'd carried for months, reported her missing, telling the officer she suspected John Blauvelt. The waiting was pure torture. I didn't think she was alive anymore, Patty Piver admitted. 2 nights later, her worst fears came true in the cold, dark basement of an abandoned house. John Blauvelt's escape was bold and swift. Right after his eerily calm interviews with police, he hit the road. His red GMC Yukon, with 17-year-old Hannah Thompson riding shotgun, raced west, leaving behind a crime scene and a devastated family. He was now a fugitive, a trained soldier with combat and survival skills, using that government training to outrun the very system he'd once sworn to protect. The U.S. Marshals stepped in, and the hunt for this arrogant, self-obsessed killer began. John thought we were never going to find him, said us Marshal Will Cook. The early investigation turned into a maddening game of cat and mouse. License plate readers caught his truck in Texas and New Mexico, but by the time authorities arrived, he'd vanished again. He and Hannah had become ghosts on the highway, but the thrill of life on the run, if it ever existed, quickly turned sour. The fantasy crumbled into harsh reality. In the Pacific Northwest, John got the Yukon stuck in mountain mud. They were forced to hike for miles, reduced to begging for spare change just to survive. It was during this desperate wandering existence that John's tough guy act finally cracked, and he confessed the full horror of what he'd done to his young, naive companion. He told Hannah that he had killed Katie at the abandoned house. He told her the knife had broken off in her neck. He told her that Katie's final words were a desperate plea, a promise that if he let her go, she wouldn't call the police. He broke down completely, weeping and screaming as he tried to twist his monstrous act into some warped declaration of love for Hannah. "I did that for you," he said, his voice cracking. Hannah later told investigators how he tried to make her feel responsible, as if it was somehow her fault. He had manipulated her masterfully, convincing her to help him cover his tracks afterward. He asked her to help hide Katie's car, whispering promises that if she lied to the police, he would keep her safe. But after a month on the run together, the harsh reality finally broke through Hannah's illusions. John abandoned her in Eugene, Oregon, leaving her completely alone. She reached out to a family friend, and on December 12, 2016, she was found safe and brought back home to Simpsonville. But investigators were waiting for her return. Through a series of intense interviews, the story slowly began to emerge, though it came out as a tangled web of conflicting emotions and torn loyalties. Here was a 17-year-old girl who had been psychologically manipulated by an older man, but she was also an accomplice who had lied to protect a killer. "I still really care about him, even though he did something really bad," she admitted through her tears. "I feel like I should hate him. Part of me does. But part of me just keeps thinking about how he used to be." For the investigators, Hannah held the key to everything. They desperately needed her to find John, so they played the long game, choosing not to charge her immediately. They hoped she would eventually lead them straight to him. But the months stretched into years, and John Blauvelt seemed to have vanished completely. The case went cold. Investigator Moorcraft eventually retired, leaving behind an open case that had become a source of deep frustration. Katie's family lived trapped in a state of suspended grief, watching their hope for justice fade with each passing day. "I never really thought they would get him," Patty Piver admitted. But the marshals refused to give up. "He's beaten us," Marshal Cook said with determination. "And we don't like to lose." The breakthrough they had been waiting for finally came 6 years after the murder. In 2022, Hannah, now a young woman, revealed a crucial secret she had been keeping. She had stayed in regular contact with John for years after returning home, first through Facebook Messenger, then later on Snapchat. Their conversations had ended back in 2019, but she still had valuable information. She believed he was living in Oregon with another woman. Honestly, she's in danger too, Investigator Schofield told her. This was exactly the lead the marshals needed. A dedicated cold case team focused all their efforts on Medford, a small city in the Northwest. They traced a phone number John had been using back to a mystery woman, which led them to an address. Then they began their stakeout. On the quiet morning of July 20th, 2022, they watched as a man matching John's description walked out of the house, shirtless. The marshals had one key piece of identifying information: a distinctive pirate tattoo. As the man strolled down the driveway, they moved in swiftly. "Police! Show us your hands!" they shouted. "Get down on the ground." The man's eyes went wide with pure shock. He dropped to the ground and was quickly handcuffed. Even then, he kept insisting they had the wrong person. "I'm Ben Klein," he said, desperately clinging to his alias. But a mobile fingerprint scanner revealed the truth in less than 5 minutes. Ben Klein had just become John Blauvelt once again. "He knew it was over," said Marshal Christo. Inside the house, sitting on the nightstand, was a loaded handgun. It was a clear sign that if the marshals hadn't caught him completely by surprise, he would have put up a serious fight. Later that day, his new girlfriend returned home to find her world completely shattered. She was visibly shaking and crying as she learned that the man she had loved and lived with for 6 years was actually a wanted murderer. The news hit Simpsonville like a thunderclap. After 6 long years, the monster was finally in custody. The trial of John Blauvelt, held in September 2024, became the final gut-wrenching chapter in a story that had haunted both a family and an entire community for 8 years. The prosecution, led by Kinley B. and John Meadows, methodically built their case piece by devastating piece. They presented the chilling X-ray showing the knife blade still lodged in Katie's neck. They showed the jury Katie's blue shirt, pointing out the small hole in the collar where the blade had entered. They argued that John had killed Katie as an act of cold revenge, blaming her for destroying the military career that had once defined him. Then they called their key witness to the stand, Hannah Thompson. Now, in her mid-20s, Hannah had to face the man she had once loved and fled with across the country. She admitted to helping him hide Katie's car and lying repeatedly to police. Then, her voice trembling with emotion, she recounted his chilling confession. "He told me that he killed her," she said quietly. "He stabbed her in the neck. And, she told the jury how he had thrown Katie's phone into a puddle of water at the abandoned house, then covered her blood with dirt to hide the evidence. The defense team, led by Paul Neely and Anna Walker, attacked Hannah's credibility relentlessly. They forced her to admit that she had lied repeatedly to friends, family, and police over the years. They pointed out the complete lack of John's DNA at the crime scene. They even tried to dismiss the damning entry found in a journal John had kept while on the run. A journal containing the stark, bold words, "I did it." The defense argued it was simply a work of fiction, filled with poems and fantasy stories. But the prosecution had a powerful rebuttal waiting. Hannah Thompson was taking the stand with no deal on the table, no promise of leniency for the 5 felony charges hanging over her head, charges that could put her away for 55 years. "She got up here and testified," Kinley told the jury, his voice steady and sure, "and she told you because she thought it was the right thing to do." After 4 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, their decision was unanimous. As to the charge of murder, the court clerk read aloud, "We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, John T. Blauvelt, guilty." In the hushed courtroom, heavy with emotion, Katie's family broke down and wept. "As soon as the jurors walked out, I just started crying," Patty Pivers recalled. John Blevelt was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "He's a monster," his victim's mother said, her voice carrying both deep grief and hard-won relief. She was helpless. The verdict brought some measure of closure, but the pain, that never goes away. Katie's family will carry the weight of her stolen life forever. John Blevelt is appealing his conviction. One final act of defiance from a man who truly believed he could outrun his crimes. And Hannah Thompson, the teenager who got caught up in a killer's dangerous world, still awaits her own trial. Her future remains uncertain. The story of Katie Blevelt stands as a heartbreaking reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind a uniform and a smile. It speaks to the devastating toll of domestic violence and to a family's unbreakable love. A love that fought for 8 long years to ensure their daughter's memory was honored with justice. Story 2. The 19th arrondissement of Paris exists worlds away from the postcard-perfect image most people know. This is a district pulsing with vibrant, striving diversity. A place where the grandeur of Haussmann's boulevards melts into the gritty, lived-in reality of working-class life. Here, the air hangs thick with the aromas of 100 different cuisines, and the streets echo with a symphony of languages from across the globe. In the heart of this district, on Rue Manine, stands an unassuming apartment building, a typical Parisian structure of weathered stone and slate, its windows gazing out onto the bustling rhythm of city life below. It was here, in this vertical village of neighbors and acquaintances, that 12-year-old Lola Daviat lived. And it was here, in the autumn of 2022, that she would be lured into an abyss of unimaginable horror by a woman who lived just a few floors away. Lola was the sun around which her family revolved. She was a bright, joyful girl, with a face framed by golden blonde hair, her spirit alive with the innocent energy of a child standing on the threshold of her teenage years. She loved gymnastics and drawing, and her laughter was a familiar, comforting sound echoing through the halls of the building where her parents, Delphine and Johann, worked as caretakers, the guardians of their small community. They were the heart of the building, the ones who knew everyone's name, who sorted the mail and kept the peace. Their home was a sanctuary, a place of warmth and love nestled within the sprawling, often indifferent city. On the afternoon of Friday, October 14th, 2022, Lola was making her way home from school, her mind likely filled with the simple, happy thoughts of the weekend ahead. She had no idea she was walking straight toward a monster. That monster had a name, Dabia Ben Kayard. At 27, she was a ghost drifting through the system, a woman adrift in a world she felt had rejected her at every turn. Born in Algeria, she had arrived in France in 2016 on a student visa, but her life had become a downward spiral of instability and failure. She was homeless, unemployed, and battled a history of drug use, a life lived on the ragged edges of society. She had been staying with her sister, who lived in the same building as the Daviats. This proximity would prove fatal. Ben Kayard was also in the country illegally. 2 months earlier, she had been served with an official order to leave France. She had ignored it completely, and in the bureaucratic shuffle of the French immigration system, she had slipped through the cracks, a phantom nursing a festering grudge. The source of that grudge, according to Ben Kayard's own disjointed and contradictory accounts, was a petty dispute. Lola's mother, Delphine, in her role as the building's caretaker, had refused to give Ben Kayard a permanent pass to the building. A minor, administrative decision that, in Ben Kayard's warped and resentful mind, became a profound personal insult. The seeds of monstrous and disproportionate revenge had been sown. At 3:15 p.m. On that fateful Friday, the unblinking eye of a CCTV camera in the building's lobby captured the moment two worlds collided. The footage showed Lola, her school backpack slung casually over her shoulder, entering the building. Then Dabia Ben-Kayed appeared, intercepting the young girl, her dark intentions hidden behind a mask of neighborly familiarity. The two were seen walking together toward the elevator. It was the last time Lola Davitt would be seen alive. As the afternoon light began to fade, a familiar parental anxiety began stirring in Delphine Davitt's chest. Lola hadn't come home. The short journey from the building's entrance to their apartment should have taken mere seconds. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The anxiety curdled into cold, sharp-edged fear. Delphine and Johann called her friends, her school, their voices tight with growing panic. No one had seen her. The digital trail of her young life had gone completely cold. At 5:00 p.m., they reported their daughter missing, and the desperate search for Lola began. While her frantic parents were raising the alarm, Dabia Ben-Kayed appeared on camera again. At 5:01 p.m., she was recorded in the entrance hall, a strange, solitary figure surrounded by heavy luggage. She seemed deeply agitated, trying to get help from passers-by to move the bags. One of them was a large, unusually heavy plastic trunk. A witness would later tell police that Ben-Kayed had offered him money to help move the trunk, claiming it was filled with items for a car boot sale. The witness refused, deeply unsettled by her strange demeanor. That bag contained the body of the child whose parents were, at that very moment, beginning their desperate search. The night that followed became a living hell of uncertainty for Lola's family. Police circulated her photograph, her bright, smiling face a stark contrast to the darkness that had swallowed her whole. But as the hours ticked relentlessly by, hope began to fray at the edges. Just after 11 p.m., a homeless man made a horrifying discovery in the courtyard of the Davitt's building. He found a large, transparent plastic trunk. Inside, the body of a young girl lay bundled and bound. The numbers 1 and 0 had been painted on the soles of her feet. Her throat bore a deep wound, and duct tape covered her face. When police arrived, Deline and Jan Daviet's worst nightmare became reality. The search for Lola was over. Now the hunt for her killer would begin. What they found was a scene of almost unimaginable horror. The autopsy would later reveal the full, devastating extent of what Lola had endured. She had been assaulted, tortured, and her throat cut with scissors and a box cutter. But ultimately, it was suffocation that took her life, her breath stolen away by the tape that sealed her mouth and nose. It was a crime of extreme cruelty, as the judge would later describe it, an act of true torture inflicted upon a defenseless child. The investigation moved swiftly. CCTV footage provided an immediate, undeniable suspect. Dave Ankerd was found and arrested the following morning. During questioning, investigators encountered a personality as chilling as the crime itself. She was a master of shifting stories, her account morphing with each question. Sometimes she admitted to everything, recounting the horror with disturbing matter-of-fact coldness. She told investigators how she'd lured Lola to her sister's apartment, forced her to shower, then committed those unspeakable acts of violence and murder. Her motive, she claimed, was simply a dispute with Lola's mother. "I wasn't going to attack the mother," she said. "I attacked her daughter." But then her story would change. She'd claim her confession was just the memory of a dream, not reality. She blamed a ghost, an armed stranger, anyone but herself. She was pure chaos incarnate. Her stories became a confusing whirlwind of lies and half-truths. But through it all, one thing remained constant: her profound and terrifying lack of empathy. When a police officer showed her a photograph of Lola's body, hoping to shock some human remorse from her, her response was a verbal shrug. "That leaves me indifferent," she said. "I was raped too, and I saw my parents die in front of me." It was a lie. Her parents were still alive in Algeria, but it was a lie that revealed a soul, hollowed out by bottomless, self-pity. A woman so consumed by her own perceived victimhood that others' suffering meant nothing to her. A police officer present during her interrogation would later testify, at no moment did she show any sign of regret, to the point that it made me doubt her guilt, despite all the evidence pointing to her. The facts were so horrific that I expected her to break down. But she did not break down. The monster remained intact. As details of the crime emerged, a wave of shock and revulsion swept across France. The murder of a child always tears at the social fabric. But Lola Daviette's case was different. It became a perfect storm of horror, a collision of seemingly random violence and deeply divisive politics. When it was revealed that Davia Bankard was an undocumented immigrant who'd been ordered to leave the country 2 months before the murder, the case instantly transformed from tragic crime story into political powder keg. The far right, led by figures like Eric Zemmour and Marine Le Pen, seized upon the case with grim, opportunistic fervor. Lola's murder, they argued, wasn't just the act of a disturbed individual, but the inevitable result of the government's weak immigration policies. They used Lola's name as a rallying cry, her face as a poster for their anti-immigration agenda. The term francicide was coined, a loaded, inflammatory word that framed the murder as an attack on France's very soul by a foreign element. Rallies were held, politicians made fiery speeches, and the airwaves filled with a toxic blend of grief and xenophobia. Lola's family, still reeling from the unimaginable horror of her death, found themselves at the center of a political hurricane. They were a private family thrust into the glare of a national spotlight. Their daughter's name had become a weapon in a political war they never asked for. In a statement of profound dignity and courage, they pleaded with the politicians to stop. "We wish that Lola be respected, as well as the memory of her and her family, by ceasing to use the name and image of our child for political ends," they said. Their quiet plea for peace and respect stood in stark contrast to the noisy, angry rhetoric of the political sphere. They wanted justice for their daughter, not a culture war fought over her grave. The trial of Davia Bankard began in October 2025, 3 years after the murder. The Paris Assize Court became a fortress of security and media attention. The case had become a national obsession, and the trial was the final, agonizing chapter in a story that had held the country in its grip. The prosecution, confident in their case, methodically laid out the evidence. The prosecution laid out their case with devastating precision. CCTV footage, forensic reports, and the chilling details of Bankard's own confession painted an undeniable picture. Psychiatric experts took the stand, testifying that while Bankard suffered from no curable mental illness, she displayed clear psychopathic tendencies and an almost complete absence of empathy. The defense faced an impossible task. With overwhelming evidence stacked against them, they couldn't deny what had happened. Instead, they painted a different portrait, focusing on Bankard's troubled past, her chaotic and unstable life, her drug use. They tried to show the jury not a cold, calculating killer, but a woman who had, as she herself claimed, lost control in a drug-fueled haze. Throughout the trial, Bankard remained a figure of unsettling stillness. She sat in the dock like a statue, her face a blank mask, her eyes revealing nothing. When she finally spoke, offering a brief apology for her actions, her words felt hollow and mechanical, devoid of the raw, genuine remorse that Lola's family and the entire nation desperately needed to hear. "I ask for forgiveness," she said simply, "and that's all I have to say." In her final chilling statement, she seemed to acknowledge the life she had taken, but in a way that somehow made it about her own experience. "I killed a baby, an angel," she said. "She must be in heaven now." Lola's family endured every agonizing day of the trial, their quiet grief a powerful presence that filled the courtroom. On Friday, October 24th, 2025, after a week-long trial, the jury and panel of judges retired to deliberate. The prosecution had requested the harshest penalty available under French law: perpetual imprisonment, a whole life sentence with no possibility of parole. This sentence was so rare that it had been handed down only 4 times since its introduction in 1994, and never to a woman. The entire nation held its breath and waited. When the verdict came, it was historic. The court found Dabia Bankard guilty of assault, torture, and murder, and granted the prosecution's request. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of ever walking free. She became the first woman in French history to receive this ultimate punishment. As he handed down the sentence, the presiding judge spoke of the extreme cruelty of the crime, the torture that had been inflicted, and the unspeakable psychological damage done to Lola and her family. The sentence, he said, reflected the extreme gravity of her crimes. Outside the courthouse, Lola's mother, Delphine, her face marked by 3 years of unimaginable pain, spoke to the press. "We believed in justice and we got it," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "even if it won't bring our Lola back." Her son echoed her words, expressing gratitude to the French judicial system. For a family that had endured a horror no family should ever face, it was a moment of profound, if bittersweet, closure. The case of Dabia Bankard and the murder of Lola Davied is a story that will haunt France for generations. It's a story of a child's life stolen by a monstrous act of random, senseless violence. It's a story of a system that failed to remove a dangerous individual, and of the political opportunism that followed. But most of all, it's the story of Lola, a bright, shining girl whose tragic death and her family's dignified, courageous response served as a powerful and heartbreaking reminder of the precious, fragile beauty of a life cut short and of a love that can... The sun of her family's life had set, but the star of her memory would continue to shine through the long, dark night of their grief. Story 3. The Olivier Cafe, nestled deep within Jakarta's glittering Grand Indonesia shopping mall, was pure sanctuary, a haven of curated coolness in the heart of the city's consumer paradise. The air practically hummed with life, the gentle clink of fine porcelain, the soft murmur of sophisticated conversations, and that rich, intoxicating aroma of artisanal coffee floating through every corner. This was where Jakarta's bright young things came to see and be seen. A perfect backdrop for casual meetings and those carefully orchestrated social rituals that define a generation. But on the afternoon of January 6th, 2016, this chic little enclave was about to become the stage for something unthinkable. A crime so cold, so breathtakingly audacious, that it would grip an entire nation and transform the simple act of drinking coffee into a symbol of the ultimate betrayal. Ween M.N.A. Salahan was just 27 years old, radiating that quiet confidence that comes when life seems to be falling perfectly into place. Born into privilege as the daughter of wealthy businessman Eddie Darmalan Sala, she was practically glowing with newlywed happiness, having married her beloved Aries Marco just weeks before. She and her twin sister Sandy were the cherished daughters of a prominent family, their futures stretching out before them like a sunlit path with no end in sight. That afternoon, M&A was looking forward to something beautifully simple, catching up with old friends over a perfect cup of coffee. One of those friends was Jessica Kamala Wango. Jessica was an enigma wrapped in contradictions, a woman whose life read like a study in stark contrasts. Like Inanna, she was 27, and the two had first crossed paths years earlier while studying at Billy Blue College of Design in Sydney, Australia. But while Inanna had returned home to her comfortable life in Jakarta, Jessica had chosen to stay on, becoming a permanent resident of Australia. Her life there had become a tangled web of burning ambition, explosive relationships, and a growing darkness that few people could truly see. Now she was back in Jakarta, and this reunion at Olivier represented a chance to reconnect with friends from what felt like another lifetime entirely. At exactly 3:33 p.m., Jessica arrived at the mall, her every movement captured by those ubiquitous, unblinking eyes of security cameras. She was completely alone and remarkably early for their planned 5:00 p.m. meeting. After securing a reservation, she wandered through the mall's gleaming corridors, her shopping bags from a luxury soap store serving as mundane props in the sinister play she was about to direct. At 4:14 p.m., she returned to the cafe and settled into her seat at the reserved table. She ordered the drinks, 2 cocktails and 1 Vietnamese iced coffee, which happened to be M&A's absolute favorite. Then Jessica waited, and waited. As the minutes slowly ticked by, she performed a strange, almost hypnotic choreography. She shifted restlessly in her seat, adjusted her hair with nervous fingers, and then, in a move that would later become the focal point of a massive murder trial, she carefully arranged her 3 large paper shopping bags on the table. They formed a wall, a flimsy but surprisingly effective curtain that completely shielded the drinks from the watchful eyes of the cafe's security cameras. Behind the screen of pure consumerism, hidden in the blind spot she had so carefully created, the trap was finally set. At 5:16 p.m., M&A arrived, accompanied by their mutual friend Hani. The air immediately lightened with the easy, comfortable chatter of friends, reuniting after too much time apart. The Vietnamese iced coffee, that tall, elegant glass of dark coffee sweetened with condensed milk, sat there waiting for M&A like a patient predator. She took a sip. Her face immediately twisted in disgust. "It's awful," she complained, waving her hand frantically in front of her mouth, as if trying to bat away the horrible taste. "It's so bad." She urged Hani to try it, but Hani, after taking just the tiniest sip, recoiled instantly from that acrid, burning sensation. Within moments, the entire scene collapsed into pure chaos and horror. M&A began gasping desperately for air, her body suddenly seizing in violent, uncontrollable convulsions. Her head rolled back helplessly. Foam began forming at her mouth, and her eyes, wide with a terror she could no longer put into words, stared blankly into the distance. The chic, sophisticated ambience of Olivier Café was completely shattered by the raw, primal reality of a young woman dying right before everyone's eyes. M&A's husband Arif received the frantic call and rushed her to Abduolo Hospital as fast as humanly possible. But it was already too late. At 6:30 p.m., Ween M&A Salahan was pronounced dead. Her life had been extinguished in the space between one sip of coffee and the next. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath, Jessica Wongo presented a picture of eerie, unsettling composure. While everyone else around her panicked and fell apart, she remained strangely still, like a calm island floating in a storm of grief and utter confusion. This disturbing detachment would become one of the first and most enduring red flags for investigators. As M&A's father, Eddie Darmalan Sala, would later testify with heartbreaking clarity, Jessica's behavior wasn't that of a grieving friend watching her world collapse. It was the behavior of someone calmly watching a plan unfold exactly as intended. The police investigation launched immediately, and the initial findings sent chills through everyone involved. An autopsy conducted on January 10th revealed extensive bleeding throughout M&A's stomach. The toxicology reports confirmed the absolutely unthinkable. Her system was completely flooded with cyanide, a poison so devastatingly potent that even a microscopic amount can kill within minutes. The Vietnamese iced coffee she had trusted enough to drink contained a completely lethal dose. This wasn't some tragic accident or terrible mistake. This was a meticulously planned and flawlessly executed murder. The focus of the investigation quickly narrowed like a laser beam to one person. The only person who had complete control over that coffee. The only person who had arrived a full hour early and built a fortress of shopping bags around what turned out to be the murder weapon. On January 30th, 2016, Jessica Kamala Wango was arrested and formally charged with the premeditated murder of her friend. The iced coffee murder, as the media quickly dubbed it, was about to become the most sensational and divisive criminal case in modern Indonesian history. As Indonesian investigators dug deeper into Jessica's life, they reached out to their counterparts in Australia. The Australian Federal Police handed over a confidential file that painted a deeply troubling picture of Jessica's life down under. This wasn't the story of a successful design student, but of a woman teetering on the very edge. The file revealed a tumultuous relationship with an Australian boyfriend, Patrick O'Connor. A relationship so explosive that it had resulted in a restraining order against her. It documented her struggles with mental health, including episodes of suicidal thoughts and a disturbing incident where she crashed her car into a nursing home. What emerged was a pattern of manipulation and simmering rage that lurked just beneath her calm, collected surface. A former colleague, Christy Louise Charter, would later testify that Jessica had two starkly different personalities. She was skilled at manipulating people to gain sympathy, becoming furious when she didn't get the attention she desperately craved. The prosecution's theory of motive began to take shape. It was a story of jealousy and revenge. They alleged that during a visit to Australia, Emma had advised Jessica to break up with the troubled Patrick O'Connor. This advice, meant as a gesture of friendship, had been interpreted by Jessica as a deep and unforgivable betrayal. In the prosecution's narrative, Emine's happy, settled life, her new marriage, her loving family, was a constant, painful reminder of Jessica's own failures. The murder, they would argue, was an act of bitter retribution, a desire to destroy the happiness she could never have. The trial of Jessica Wango began on June 15, 2016, and it was unlike anything Indonesia had ever witnessed. The proceedings were broadcast live on national television, transforming a complex legal battle into a national spectacle. For nearly 5 months, the country was held captive by this real-life courtroom drama. Millions tuned in daily, dissecting in every piece of evidence, every expert opinion, every tearful testimony. The trial became a cultural phenomenon, its ratings eclipsing those of the popular soap operas it replaced. The public was divided, with passionate arguments for both Jessica's guilt and her innocence erupting in cafes, offices, and online forums across the archipelago. The prosecution, led by a team of determined public prosecutors, built their case on a powerful, if circumstantial, chain of evidence. They had the CCTV footage showing Jessica's strange behavior, her early arrival, the ordering of the drinks, and that crucial moment when she erected the wall of shopping bags. They argued this wasn't the behavior of an innocent person, but the calculated actions of a killer concealing her crime. This deed was vile and sadistic, committed against her own friend, the chief judge would later conclude, echoing the prosecution's sentiment. The defense, led by the formidable lawyer Otto Habuan, fought back with equal intensity. Their central argument was simple and powerful. There was no direct evidence. No one saw Jessica put cyanide into the coffee. The case, they argued, was built on speculation, misinterpretation, and a rush to judgment fueled by media frenzy. They brought in their own team of experts, including a respected Australian forensic pathologist, Bong Bang, who delivered shocking testimony. He claimed that the amount of cyanide found in Emine's stomach, 0.2 mg per liter, discovered days after her death, was negligible and far below a lethal dose. He argued that Emine could have died from natural causes, a theory that sent shockwaves through the trial. The prosecution struck back, attacking Ang's credibility. He was later deported for not having the proper work visa, a move the defense saw as a blatant attempt to silence a dissenting voice. The trial became a battle of experts, a dizzying back and forth of conflicting scientific opinions. Toxicologists for the prosecution insisted that the low level of cyanide was due to the time that had passed before the sample was taken. They maintained that the symptoms MNA displayed were classic signs of cyanide poisoning. Defense experts countered that a lethal dose of cyanide would have produced a strong, unmistakable almond-like odor that would have filled the cafe, an odor that no one had reported. The courtroom was also a theater of raw emotion. MNA's father, Eddie Darman Sala, was a constant looming presence, his grief and rage palpable. He gave impassioned interviews to the media, at one point calling Jessica a crazy psychopath, and became a driving force in the public narrative of her guilt. MNA's twin sister, Sandy, testified that Jessica had sent her strange messages after MNA's death, links to news articles about poison. The family found this deeply suspicious. Through it all, Jessica remained a figure of confounding composure. She rarely showed emotion, her face a blank canvas onto which a divided nation projected its own theories of guilt and innocence. The prosecution painted her composure something chilling. The cold, calculated mask of a psychopath. Her defense saw it differently. The stunned reaction of an innocent woman, wrongly accused of an unthinkable crime. In the privacy of her own diary, she dismissed the theories against her as utterly illogical. When she finally broke her silence, her explanation was startlingly simple. The shopping bags? Oh, it's just me being me, she said with a shrug. I just put it there, shuffle it around and play with it. It really doesn't mean anything at all, just me being bored. On October 27, 2016, after a grueling 135-day trial, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The panel of 3 judges delivered their verdict. Jessica Kamala Wango was guilty of the premeditated murder of Waima Salahim. 20 years in prison. The words echoed through a packed courtroom as the nation watched, collectively holding its breath. Jessica's desperate appeals to the Jakarta High Court and later to the Supreme Court were both rejected. Her fate was sealed. But the legal conviction did little to quiet the storm of public debate. This case, with no smoking gun built on circumstantial evidence and conflicting expert testimony, remained a lightning rod of controversy. When the 2023 Netflix documentary Ice Cold Murder Coffee and Jessica Wango hit screens, it threw gasoline on the fire, presenting the story to audiences worldwide and raising troubling questions about the trial's fairness and the evidence's reliability. The film pulled back the curtain on the immense public pressure, the potential for bias, and the arguments of legal experts who insisted the prosecution had failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. On August 18, 2024, after serving approximately 8 years behind bars, Jessica Wango walked free on parole. She emerged from prison transformed, a celebrity of sorts, a figure wrapped in enduring fascination and notoriety. At the press conference following her release, she stood firm in maintaining her innocence, though she carefully sidestepped any direct questions about her responsibility for MNA's death. "I have forgiven everyone who wronged me," she declared, her words carrying a deliberately crafted ambiguity. The story of Jessica Wango and the iced coffee murder is a tragedy that simply won't rest. It's the story of a young life cut tragically short, of a friendship that somehow curdled into deadly poison, and of a legal battle that consumed a nation's attention. What remains is a trail of unanswered questions and a family forever shattered by an immeasurable loss. For MNA Salahin's loved ones, the conviction brought a measure of justice, but never peace. The why of it all reigns locked in darkness, an impenetrable mystery, a secret hidden behind the calm, enigmatic smile of the woman who shared that final fatal cup of coffee with her friend. Story 4. The morning of March 16, 2012, dawned bright and clear over Morgan Hill, California. Spring was stirring in the quiet, rolling hills of the Santa Clara Valley. For 15-year-old Sierra May Lamar, this Friday felt like any other day, just another end to another school week. Sierra was navigating the complicated world of being a teenager. She'd recently moved from her hometown of Fremont to live with her mother Marlene and her mother's boyfriend. The change had turned her world upside down. She missed everything about her old life, her friends, the familiar routines, and especially her father Steve, who meant the world to her. This quiet unhappiness would later cast a shadow over the first terrifying hours of her disappearance. It offered investigators a flicker of false hope that maybe, just maybe, she had simply run away. But those who knew Sierra understood her spirit. She was pure youthful energy, a cheerleader with an infectious smile, known for her kindness and vibrant personality. At 5'2", with long hair and a distinctive small mole on her neck, she had a presence that lit up any room. That morning, Sierra went through her usual routine. She picked out her outfit carefully. Jeans and a black San Jose Sharks sweatshirt, showing her love for the local hockey team. Just before 7 a.m., she posted one last cheerful selfie to her Twitter account. That bright, fleeting smile would soon become the haunting image of a tragedy. At 7:11 a.m., a friend texted her about meeting before class to review homework. The message went through, but Sierra's reply never came. Sierra walked out her front door into the pale morning light and simply vanished. Her path to the school bus stop was a lonely stretch. A short walk down a deserted country road bordered by fields and scattered remote properties. She'd made this journey countless times before. It was just another mundane walk connecting her suburban home to the wider world of school and friendship. The bus was scheduled to arrive at 7:35 a.m. It came right on time. Doors opening for the usual crowd of sleepy teenagers. But Sierra wasn't among them. At first, her absence seemed like a small worry. Throughout the day, her mother sent gentle text reminders about household chores. Silence. As afternoon stretched into evening and Sierra still hadn't come home, that worry began to transform into something much darker. Her parents' calls went straight to voicemail. By nightfall, worry had exploded into full-blown panic. Marlene and Steve Lamar reported their daughter missing, and the search for Sierra began. The first hours were a whirlwind of frantic activity. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office launched an immediate investigation, initially leaning toward the theory that Sierra might have run away, given her known struggles with the recent move. But for those closest to her, this explanation felt completely wrong. Sierra was responsible and deeply connected to her family. This sudden, silent disappearance was terrifyingly out of character. As word spread, the Morgan Hill community began to rally. A search center sprang up, and volunteers started pouring in. Ordinary people moved by a family's anguish. Their numbers grew from dozens to hundreds, and eventually to thousands. The first major breakthrough came the very next day, and it destroyed any remaining hope that Sierra had left on her own. A woman walking her dog discovered Sierra's cell phone in a field about 2 miles from her home. Its silent, dark screen felt like a grim warning. The following day, searchers made an even more disturbing discovery just 100 yards away. Hidden near an abandoned shed, they found Sierra's black and pink juicy handbag. Inside were her school books and her clothes, neatly folded jeans and the San Jose Sharks sweatshirt she'd been wearing when she disappeared. The message was devastatingly clear. Sierra hadn't run away. Someone had taken her. This discovery transformed a missing person case into a major criminal investigation. The sheriff's office, now certain they were dealing with a violent abduction, processed every item with meticulous care. The clothes held the most crucial evidence. Forensic analysts made 2 critical discoveries on Sierra's jeans. First, they found tiny glass beads embedded in the fabric, the same type used in reflective road markings. This suggested Sierra had been dragged across pavement at some point during her ordeal. The second discovery was even more significant. On the inseam of her jeans, investigators found a small, nearly invisible stain containing male DNA. This single piece of evidence changed everything. The attacker had left behind a microscopic signature, a calling card that could link him directly to his victim. On March 28, 2012, just 12 days after Sierra disappeared, that DNA sample was run through CODIS, the National DNA Database. The database search came back with an almost unbelievable result: 12 potential matches. But when a database administrator took a closer look at the genetic markers, 11 of them quickly fell away. The DNA belonged to just one man, a 21-year-old from Morgan Hill named Antelope Garcia Torres. In that moment, the faceless predator who had snatched Sierra from the roadside finally had a name. Antelope Garcia Torres wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. His criminal record included a conviction for felony assault. He lived in a trailer park just 7 miles from Sierra's bus stop, placing him right in the heart of where it all happened. Here was a young man sharing his life with his mother and pregnant girlfriend. On the surface, it looked ordinary enough, but beneath that everyday facade lurked something dark and violent. As investigators dug deeper into his past, what they uncovered sent chills down their spines. Starting back in 2009, there had been a series of attempted kidnappings in local Safeway parking lots. Each time, a man would approach women, sometimes wielding a stun gun, trying to snatch them in broad daylight. During one of these brazen attacks, the assailant dropped his stun gun as he fled. Police recovered a fingerprint from the battery compartment, but back then, it didn't match anyone in the system. Now, with their suspect in sight, they ran that print again. Perfect match. Antelope Garcia Torres. The terrifying pattern became crystal clear. Garcia Torres was a serial predator who'd been escalating his attacks, moving from failed attempts to what appeared to be a successful and deadly abduction. The net was closing fast. Detectives pulled surveillance footage from his trailer park. The grainy video revealed his car, a red Volkswagen Jetta, leaving the property around 7 in the morning on the day Sierra disappeared, just minutes before she would have left her home. When questioned, Garcia Torres became evasive. He claimed he'd been fishing alone that morning, an alibi with no witnesses and absolutely nothing to back it up. Investigators seized his car, and there, in the quiet confines of that red Jetta, they found the final, undeniable proof of his guilt. On the inside of a door handle, a trace of Sierra's DNA. In the trunk, tangled with a length of rough rope, a single, long strand of her hair. On May 21st, 2012, 2 months after Sierra's disappearance, Antelope Garcia Torres was arrested and charged with her kidnapping and murder. The arrest brought the community a sense of grim satisfaction, but for Sierra's family, it felt like a hollow victory. They had their suspect behind bars, yet they still didn't have their daughter. The most agonizing question remained: where was Sierra? The arrest didn't end the search, it intensified it. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Led by Sierra's father, Steve Lamar, a quiet man whose grief had been forged into unbreakable resolve, thousands of volunteers dedicated their weekends to finding Sierra. For 3 long years, they spread out across the rugged terrain of Santa Clara County, a civilian army driven by empathy and shared purpose. They combed through fields, reservoirs, and remote hillsides, enduring sweltering heat and pouring rain. The search for Sierra Lamar became the longest-running active search for a missing person in the United States. It stood as a testament to the enduring power of community love and a father's unwavering devotion. Steve Lamar became the stoic, heartbroken face of the search effort. "I need to be strong for my daughter," he would say, his voice steady despite the immense pain. "And I need to be strong for all the volunteers." But the search took its toll. A grueling, emotionally draining ordeal. Every piece of discarded clothing, every patch of disturbed earth brought a fresh wave of hope, followed by the crushing weight of disappointment. Through it all, Antelope Garcia Torres remained silent, a cold, indifferent wall against which a family's desperate pleas fell unheard. On March 14th, 2015, 3 years after Sierra vanished, her family made the gut-wrenching decision to officially close the Volunteer Search Center. It wasn't an admission of defeat, but a painful acknowledgement of reality. After thousands of hours and countless miles, they were no closer to finding her. It didn't make sense to keep putting all these people through this, Steve Lamar said, the weight of his responsibility to the volunteers heavy in his words. The search was over, but the fight for justice was just beginning. The trial of Antelope Garcia Torres began on January 30th, 2017. This was a case built not on a body or confession, but on a powerful interlocking chain of circumstantial and forensic evidence. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney David Boyd, faced a monumental challenge: convince a jury that Sierra Lamar wasn't just missing, but dead, and that the man sitting silently in the courtroom was her killer. The trial stretched on, emotionally charged from start to finish. The prosecution methodically built their case, presenting the DNA evidence from Sierra's jeans, the fingerprint from the stun gun, and the hair and DNA found in Garcia Torres's car. They brought the women who had survived his previous abduction attempts to the stand. Their testimony painted a chilling portrait of a predator who had been perfecting his methods for years. But the defense, led by Al Lopez, wasn't going down without a fight. They came back swinging hard. They tore into the investigation itself, claiming that lead detective Herman Leon had botched the evidence and suffered from dangerous tunnel vision. According to them, Leon had zeroed in on Garcia Torres while ignoring every other possibility. The DNA evidence? Just contamination, they argued. The entire case against their client, nothing more than a tragic series of coincidences that had spiraled out of control. But then came the most devastating testimony of all. Not from experts or detectives, but from Sierra's own parents. When Marlene Lamar took the stand, her body shook with sobs so intense she couldn't even speak her own name during the swearing-in. Through her tears, she spoke of the absolute horror of her daughter's disappearance. The endless, crushing nightmare of not knowing where Sierra was, of wondering every single day what had happened to her little girl. Steve Lamar followed his wife to the witness stand, his voice breaking with emotion as he explained why they'd made an impossible decision. They hadn't held a funeral for Sierra. It didn't make sense without her body, he said. Those simple, heartbreaking words echoed through the silent courtroom like a prayer. On May 9th, 2017, after 4 long months of testimony, the jury finally delivered their verdict. Guilty. Antolin Garcia Torres was found guilty of first-degree murder in Sierra Lamar's death, and guilty of attempting to kidnap 3 other women. The verdict brought a moment of justice, profound, but somehow still incomplete. The sentencing phase became one final desperate plea for answers. Sierra's parents faced their daughter's killer directly, looking him in the eye. "I can only hope that your time in prison will be a living hell," Steve Lamar said, his voice raw with a father's rage and unbearable grief. Marlene's voice shook, but her words came out clear and strong as she stared directly at Garcia Torres. "You could end this. You could repent and tell us where she is. What if she was your child?" Garcia Torres had considered speaking at his sentencing, but in that crucial moment, he remained completely silent. His face showed nothing, just a blank mask of indifference. The jury, deeply moved by the family's anguish, ultimately rejected the death penalty. Antolin Garcia Torres was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in delivering that sentence, stated what seemed obvious to everyone in the room. The motive was clear: sexual compulsion and gratification. Garcia Torres was shipped off to Corcoran State Prison, a maximum security facility where he would spend the rest of his days. He took the secret of Sierra's location with him, locked away forever. In all the years since the trial ended, the Lamar family's pain hasn't faded. The conviction brought some legal closure, yes, but without Sierra's body, that emotional wound stays wide open, a constant, aching void that nothing can fill. Garcia Torres, in a rare conversation with a reporter, continued claiming his innocence. He refused to offer even a hint of information that might lead to recovering Sierra's remains. The story of Sierra Lamar is a tragedy that reaches far beyond one violent act. It's the story of a family's unbreakable love, of a community's extraordinary compassion, of a justice system that can deliver a verdict, but can't always deliver peace. Sierra's laughter is gone forever. Her future was stolen, but her memory lives on, a bright, painful light cutting through the darkness of loss. Somewhere in the rolling hills and quiet fields of Santa Clara County, she still waits to be found. A silent witness to a crime that has a conviction, but no real ending. Story 5. The humid Florida air hung thick and heavy over Escambia County Mobile Home Park, a place where secrets festered like mold in the damp subtropical heat. Life here meant walking a precarious line between close-knit community bonds and tensions that simmered just beneath the surface. This was a world away from the sun-drenched beaches and tourist-filled resorts that most people picture when they think of Florida. Here, among worn-out trailers and dusty roads, the lives of 4 young women were about to become forever and tragically intertwined. Adriana Redon Zimmerman was 19, standing right on the threshold of adulthood. She was a young woman with a future still waiting to be written, known for her vibrant personality and a spirit that couldn't be easily contained. But, like so many others in this tight-knit community, she found herself navigating friendships and relationships that could shift and change in an instant. One of those connections was with the Brown family, who lived just a trailer away. Tina Lasagna Brown was a woman whose life had been carved by hardship and shaped by a fierce, often misguided, sense of loyalty. In her late 30s, she was a mother who commanded respect and wielded considerable influence throughout the mobile home park. Her daughter, Brittany Angelique Miller, was only 16. She balanced on that delicate edge between childhood and womanhood, wrestling with all the universal insecurities of adolescence, but in an environment that offered little nurturing or guidance. The desperate need for a mother's approval can become a powerful and dangerous driving force. For Brittany, this hunger would eventually lead her down a path into unimaginable darkness. The 4th woman caught in this tragic web was Heather Trina Lee, a neighbor of the Browns. A few years older than Brittany, her close proximity to the Brown family naturally drew her into their circle, a decision that would ultimately cost her years of her freedom. The friendship between Adriana, Brittany, and Tina hadn't always been shadowed by danger. There had been genuine moments of shared laughter and easy companionship, the kind of natural intimacy that can bloom in small, enclosed communities. But lurking beneath that surface, a current of resentment had begun to flow, a current that would soon surge into a devastating wave of violence. The spark that ignited this tragedy was something that seemed almost trivial, a teenage love triangle that spiraled completely out of control. Brittany discovered that Adriana had been secretly involved with her boyfriend. The betrayal cut deep, and her anger began to fester and grow. In a confrontation that served as a dark preview of what was coming, Brittany had tried to strike Adriana. Acting purely in self-defense, Adriana used a stun gun on Brittany. That incident became a crucial turning point, the moment when a simple teenage dispute escalated into something far more sinister. The stun gun, a weapon that would make its reappearance on the night of the attack, cast a chilling shadow over what was to come. In the days that followed, the air practically crackled with unspoken threats and barely contained rage. Tina Brown, ever the fiercely protective mother, saw the stun gun incident as an unforgivable attack on her daughter. A plan began taking shape in her mind, a twisted scheme for revenge that would not only punish Adriana, but also reassert her own dominance in their small world. She wouldn't act alone. She would draw both her daughter Brittany and their neighbor Heather Lee into her vengeful plot. On March 24, 2010, the plan was finally set into motion. Tina Brown, pretending she wanted to repair their damaged friendship, invited Adriana to her home. Adriana, perhaps hoping for genuine reconciliation, or maybe simply unaware of just how deep the hatred had grown, accepted the invitation. It was a decision that would seal her fate. The moment Adriana stepped through the door of the Browns' trailer, any pretense of friendship shattered completely. The welcome she received wasn't one of forgiveness, but of brutal, calculated violence. Tina Brown, her face twisted with rage, led the attack. She was joined by her daughter Brittany and their neighbor Heather Lee. The three women, a terrifying force of fury, descended upon Adriana with shocking, sudden savagery. Tina Brown wielded a crowbar, bringing the heavy, cold piece of iron down on Adriana's body with sickening force. The sound of those blows echoed through the small trailer, creating a horrifying rhythm of pain and terror. The stun gun, the very same weapon Adriana had used in self-defense just days earlier, was now turned against her. Tina Brown repeatedly shocked Adriana, each electric jolt sending waves of agony through her body. Brittany Miller, despite being only 16 years old, was far from a passive observer in this horrific scene. She actively participated in the attack, her actions fueled by a toxic mixture of teenage anger, desperate need for her mother's approval, and the damaging influence of a lifetime exposed to violence and dysfunction. Heather Lee, swept up in the storm of Tina Brown's rage, also joined the brutal assault. But the attack inside the trailer was only the beginning of Adriana's ordeal. The three women, their adrenaline surging, and their judgment clouded by a bloodlust that defied all understanding, were far from finished with her. They dragged Adriana from the trailer, bruised, battered, barely clinging to consciousness, and forced her into a waiting car. Their destination lay deep in the woods nearby, a secluded place where they believed the darkness and towering trees would hide what they were about to do. The drive through those winding forest roads became a journey into pure evil. Trapped in that car with her attackers, Adriana must have felt a terror beyond our comprehension. These women, once her friends, had become her captors. Their familiar faces now wore masks of cold malice. When they finally reached that desolate clearing, they yanked Adriana from the vehicle. The night air hung cool and still, a sharp contrast to the horror about to unfold. Tina Brown, the mastermind behind this monstrous plan, had come prepared with a container of gasoline. With chilling calculation, the three women doused Adriana in the flammable liquid. The acrid smell cut through the night air. Then they lit the match. Flames erupted with a ferocious roar, engulfing Adriana in unimaginable agony. The women stood watching for a moment, firelight dancing in their eyes, before turning their backs on the inferno they had created. They left her there to die. But Adriana Zimmerman was a fighter. In an act of incredible strength and sheer will, she escaped those flames. Her body became a canvas of unspeakable pain, with severe burns covering over 60% of her skin. Yet her spirit refused to be extinguished. She stumbled through those dark woods like a living ghost until she reached a nearby home. There, she found help. She managed to call 911, and in a voice weak with pain but firm with conviction, she identified her attackers, Tina Brown, Brittany Miller, and Heather Lee. Adriana was rushed to a hospital in Mobile, Alabama, where doctors admitted her to the burn unit. For 16 long days, she fought for her life. Her body was ravaged by fire, but her mind remained sharp enough to give authorities the crucial information they needed to bring her attackers to justice. Her courage in those final days stood as a testament to her incredible strength, a final act of defiance against the women who had tried to silence her forever. On April 9th, 2010, 19-year-old Adriana Reeden Zimmerman succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy report listed the cause of death as multiple thermal injuries. Her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a profound loss that shattered her family, her friends, and an entire community left to grapple with such senseless brutality. Adriana's own identification of her attackers led to their swift arrest. Tina Brown, Brittany Miller, and Heather Lee were taken into custody and charged with first-degree premeditated murder, a crime that carried the possibility of the death penalty in Florida. News of this horrific crime sent shockwaves through Escambia County and beyond. It served as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary lives. The legal proceedings that followed proved as complex and dramatic as the crime itself. Each of the three women would face justice, but their paths through the legal system would take different turns. Their fates would be determined by legal strategy, plea bargains, and the specifics of their involvement in the murder. Heather Lee was the first to stand trial. Faced with overwhelming evidence against her, she made a decision that would significantly impact her co-defendants' cases. On November 3rd, 2011, she reached a plea agreement with the prosecution. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder. In exchange for a more lenient sentence, she agreed to testify against Tina Brown and Brittany Miller. Her testimony would provide a chilling insider's account of the crime, a first-hand narrative of the planning, the attack, and the horrific final moments of Adriana Zimmerman's life. On July 20th, 2012, Heather Lee was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Tina Brown's trial began on June 18th, 2012. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney Bridget Jensen, a formidable prosecutor known for her success in high-profile murder cases, presented a compelling and horrifying case against her. They painted a picture of a woman who wasn't just a participant in the crime, but its mastermind. A vengeful mother who had orchestrated the torture and murder of a young woman. The jury heard testimony from Heather Lee, who described in chilling detail Tina Brown's role in the attack, from wielding the crowbar to dousing Adriana in gasoline. On June 21st, 2012, after just 1 hour of deliberation, the jury found Tina Brown guilty of first-degree murder. A few days later, that same jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. In court, Tina Brown reportedly apologized to Adriana's family, a gesture that rang hollow in the face of the unspeakable cruelty she had inflicted. On September 28, 2012, Judge Gary Begosh formally sentenced Tina Brown to death. She was sent to Lowell Correctional Institution, where she would become one of the few women on Florida's death row. Brittany Miller's case was the last to be heard, and in many ways, it was the most complex. At just 16 years old, she was still a juvenile when the murder took place, a crucial detail that would reshape everything about her legal fate. When she entered her guilty plea to first-degree murder, her age became her shield against the ultimate punishment. The death penalty was off the table. Only one sentence remained possible: life in prison without parole. On May 7th, 2013, the gavel fell, and Brittany Miller disappeared behind bars for what seemed like forever. But her story was far from over. In the years that followed, her case would ignite fierce debates about how we sentence our youngest offenders. 4 years later, in 2017, something unexpected happened. Brittany fought back, appealing to withdraw that guilty plea. Her argument was compelling. As a juvenile, she claimed, she couldn't have truly grasped what those words would cost her. Even more powerful was her legal foundation. A landmark Supreme Court ruling that declared mandatory life sentences without parole unconstitutional for juveniles. That decision cracked open a door that had seemed permanently sealed. Brittany would get her day in court again, a chance to argue for mercy based on her youth and the darkness that had shaped her young life. When October 2017 arrived, her resentencing hearing peeled back the layers of a deeply troubled past. The courtroom listened as the pieces of March 24, 2010 were examined through a different lens. Psychologist Nina Malik painted a devastating portrait of Brittany's childhood, a landscape scarred by abuse, neglect, and constant exposure to violence and drugs. The court learned a heartbreaking truth. Brittany had been a victim long before she became a perpetrator. Family members had subjected her to unspeakable abuse, both physical and sexual. Her young mind, still developing, had been warped by trauma. Her ability to connect with others had been shattered by an upbringing that offered cruelty instead of care. In this toxic environment, her defense argued, Brittany had become clay in her domineering mother's hands. Her role in the murder wasn't born from inherent evil, but from a desperate hunger for approval, a child's tragic need to find belonging in a world that had shown her precious little love or safety. The hearing also revealed a different side of Brittany's story. A prison employee testified about her transformation behind bars. She'd become a model inmate, working diligently in the library at Lowell Correctional Institution. Here was evidence of growth, of a young woman maturing and finding her way toward redemption. But the state wasn't ready to let compassion overshadow justice. Prosecutors reminded everyone present of the savage reality of what had happened to Adriana Zimmerman. They laid out the horrific details once more: the taser, the brutal beating, the kidnapping, and finally, the unthinkable act of setting a young woman ablaze. On November 6, 2017, Circuit Judge Gary Burgosh, the same judge who had condemned Brittany's mother to death, faced an impossible decision. He acknowledged the weight of her traumatic past and recognized her potential for rehabilitation. Yet he couldn't ignore the magnitude of what she'd done. His ruling struck a careful balance. The life sentence would stand, but with one crucial modification. After 15 years, Brittany would be eligible for review, a recognition of her juvenile status when the crime occurred. Today, the shadow of Adriana Zimmerman's murder still stretches long across multiple lives. Heather Lee serves her time at Gadsden Correctional Facility, with freedom potentially waiting in 2031. Tina Brown sits on death row at Lowell Correctional Institution, carrying a grim distinction. As of late 2024, she became the only woman awaiting execution in all of Florida. Brittany Miller remains at Lowell Correctional Institution, living out her life sentence day by day. Her case stands as a haunting reminder of how complicated justice can be when trauma and accountability collide. It forces us to grapple with uncomfortable questions about where victimhood ends and responsibility begins. The murder of Adriana Zimmerman tells a story of unimaginable cruelty. A bright young life snuffed out by senseless violence. But within that darkness lies something remarkable. The story of extraordinary courage. In her final moments, Adriana found the strength to speak truth, ensuring her killers couldn't escape justice. Though her voice was silenced far too soon, it continues to resonate through courtrooms and communities. Her spirit endures as a testament to the power of truth and the refusal to be forgotten. This case serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. It shows us how friendship can twist into hatred, how teenage conflicts can explode into unthinkable violence, and how single moments of choice can send shockwaves through entire communities for years to come. The humid Florida air in that mobile home park still carries more than just heat. It holds the weight of a tragedy that never should have happened, a reminder of lives forever changed by one terrible night. Story 6. The heart of Indiana beats with a steady, unpretentious rhythm. It's a land of sprawling cornfields and close-knit towns. where the bonds of family and community form the very foundation of daily life. In the town of Wabash, life for 10-year-old Nakota Blake Kelly appeared to be woven from the familiar threads of childhood wonder. He was a boy whose grin could stretch from ear to ear, a passionate fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and a gifted baseball player who dreamed of someday making it to the major leagues. By every measure, he was a shining light, a boy overflowing with love and laughter. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect childhood, a dark and terrifying current was pulling him toward an unthinkable fate. Nakota's world was split in two: the love and home he shared with his mother, Haley Kelly, and those court-ordered weekend visits with a father he had learned to fear with chilling certainty. That father was Anthony Duba. To the family court system, he appeared to be a man fighting for his parental rights, a father desperate to maintain a relationship with his son. But Anthony Duba was a man who lived in the shadows, a ghost who had drifted through life wearing the stolen identities of others. Born in Nigeria, he had become a master of deception, building his life in the United States on a foundation of lies. He had served time in federal prison for Social Security fraud and identity theft. Immigration and Customs Enforcement had tried and failed to deport him after Nigeria refused to take him back. After his release in 2016, he returned to Indiana, and with the court's blessing, was granted visitation with a son who barely knew him. Those visits became a source of constant tension and growing terror. From the very first overnight stay in 2017, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. Duba gave Nakota a double dose of his ADHD medication, an act he brushed off as an accident. But for Haley, it felt like the first tremor of an approaching earthquake. The incidents only escalated from there. Reports surfaced of Duba pulling Nakota down the stairs, striking him in the face, and threatening to harm Haley in the boy's presence. Each time, Haley did what any desperate mother would do. She called the Indiana Department of Child Services, DCS, her voice carrying a frantic plea for someone to see the danger she could see so clearly. But the system, the very institution designed to protect children like Nakota, became a bureaucratic wall of indifference. Time and again, DCS investigated her complaints, and time and again, they were dismissed, stamped with one cold, final word: unsubstantiated. Haley begged the judge to order supervised visits, but without substantiated claims of abuse, her requests were denied. To the court, she was just another bitter mother trying to turn a father against his son. Her fears were dismissed as nothing more than the calculated moves of a custody battle gone wrong. Duba, the practiced manipulator, played his part to perfection. He accused Haley of making baseless accusations to keep him from his son. "This is all about the mother not getting her way," he claimed. The system listened to him. It did not listen to the mother, and it did not listen to the child. In the week leading up to his final visit, Nakota's fear was no longer a quiet whisper. It had become a tidal wave of terrible knowing. During a phone call, his father, enraged that Nakota had hung up on him, had unleashed a storm of anger. A few days later, Nakota spoke to his mother, his voice small and filled with a terror no 10-year-old should ever carry. "I'm dead," he said, the words hanging in the air with unbearable weight. "Don't expect me to come home." Haley, her heart seizing with a mother's worst nightmare, asked him what he meant. "My dad is going to kill me," he replied. Haley, frantic beyond measure, did the only thing she knew to do. She called DCS again. She told them exactly what her son had said, her voice ringing like a desperate alarm bell. But that bell went unheard. The visit was court-ordered. The system was unmovable. And so, on the weekend of July 18th, 2020, Nakota Blake Kelly was sent to spend the weekend with the man he believed was going to kill him. Saturday, July 18th, the day of the handover, was also the last game of the Little League season. Nakota loved baseball more than anything, and he couldn't bear to miss that final game. His coach would later describe him as a talented player, a natural on the field. Haley, wanting to give her son one last moment of pure childhood joy, one final inning under the summer sun, made a decision that would haunt her forever. She let him play. The game made them late. The court-ordered exchange was supposed to happen in Kokomo at 6:00 p.m. They didn't arrive until 9:15. Anthony Duba was furious. That 3-hour delay was a blatant violation of the court order, a challenge to his authority that he would not tolerate. The handover was tense, the air thick with his rage. Haley, her heart heavy with dread she couldn't shake, watched as her son, the boy with the radiant smile, was driven away by a man consumed with anger. It was the last time she would ever see him alive. That night, at 7:36 p.m., Nakota made his final call home. He told his mother he loved her, said he'd eaten dinner and was watching YouTube, said he'd see her at pickup time tomorrow. Just a routine call, a moment of reassurance, a son's final, unknowing goodbye. 2 hours later, Anthony Duba picked up his own phone. His voice came through as a frantic, panicked torrent when he called a relative in Texas. "I just killed my son," he screamed into the receiver. The confession hit like a brutal, stunning blow, an admission of the unthinkable. The horrified relative immediately contacted Indianapolis police. At 10:11 p.m., officers arrived at Duba's apartment on West Lake South Drive for a welfare check. They knocked, but silence answered back. They could hear movement inside. They spotted Duba's white Jeep Patriot in the parking lot, but for reasons that would later be scrutinized and agonized over, a supervisor told the officers on scene there wasn't sufficient reason to force entry. They left, and in the terrible silence that followed, Anthony Duba was left alone with his crime. The night stretched endlessly. Darkness absolute inside that apartment. Surveillance cameras from the complex captured a chilling, ghostly ballet of activity. Duba's Jeep was seen leaving and returning multiple times between 2:27 a.m. and 7:44 a.m. On Sunday, July 19th, his movements were frantic, purposeful. The actions of a man desperately trying to erase a monstrous act. At 8:30 a.m., cameras showed him going in and out of his apartment 3 times. On the second trip, he was seen throwing a bag into the complex dumpster. Later that morning, he made another call, this time to a friend. He confessed again, the words tumbling out in a rush of self-incriminating horror. He had killed Nakota, he said. He had suffocated him and disposed of the body. He asked his friend to borrow a suitcase. The friend, stunned and appalled, told him he was calling 911 and that Duba should return to his apartment. Duba claimed he was already out of state but was on his way back. At 11:43 a.m., the friend made that call. For the second time, police descended on Duba's apartment. This time, they didn't leave. They had got keys from the apartment manager and went inside. The apartment was empty. Both Duba and Nakota were gone. But evidence of what had happened there was everywhere, a silent, screaming testament to a night of unimaginable violence. On the bathroom floor, they found disturbing evidence. The bedroom was a scene of horror, walls, floor, and ceiling spattered with blood. A small amount of blood was also found in the entryway. DNA testing would later confirm what they already knew in their hearts. It was Nakota's. As police were uncovering this gruesome scene, Haley Kelly's world was beginning to fracture. She'd been texting her son all morning, her messages going unanswered. At 2:01 p.m., a message finally came from Duba's phone. It wasn't from Nakota. The words were cryptic, chilling, and utterly devastating. "Sometimes I hear voices. My son is in heaven." Haley texted back. What? Her mind refused to process the horror of what she was reading. There was no reply. The silence was absolute. The little boy who had predicted his own death was gone. The prophecy had been fulfilled. A massive manhunt was launched. Police tracked Duba's phone as he fled, following a digital breadcrumb trail that led them through Indiana, Illinois, and into Missouri. At 4 p.m. on Sunday, the Missouri State Highway Patrol stopped his Jeep in Monotone County, 375 miles from the blood-spattered apartment in Indianapolis. Anthony Duba was arrested without incident. In the back of his Jeep, they found bloodstains that would later be matched to Nakota, but of the boy himself, there was no sign. The search for Anthony Duba was over. The search for Nakota Kelly was just beginning, and it was a search that would have no end. The legal proceedings that followed were a slow, agonizing journey toward a justice that could never be complete. For over 3 years, Anthony Duba maintained his innocence, his lawyers fighting to have evidence found in his apartment suppressed, arguing that police had entered illegally. But in September 2023, the facade finally crumbled. Duba agreed to a plea deal. He entered a plea of guilty, but mentally ill to the murder of his son. He stood in a Marion County courtroom, wearing an orange jail jumpsuit, and admitted that he had killed Nakota. He told the judge he'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a claim that allowed him to receive psychiatric treatment in prison, but did not absolve him of his crime. He confessed to strangling and dismembering his 10-year-old son. On October 25th, 2023, he was sentenced. The plea deal allowed for a sentence of 45 to 55 years. The judge, in a courtroom heavy with grief that had festered for 3 years, sentenced Anthony Duba to 52 years in prison. It was a long sentence, but for a mother who had lost her child, it was not enough. The man who had taken her son's life would one day walk free. Her son would never come home. The conviction brought a legal end to the case, but it couldn't bring closure. It couldn't bring peace, and it couldn't bring Nakota home. His body has never been found. His final resting place remains a secret that his killer may take to the grave. For his family, the grief cuts even deeper because of one terrible, unending question. Where is he? They cannot bury him, cannot mourn him at a graveside, cannot have that simple, sacred ritual of saying a final goodbye. In the wake of this tragedy, Haley Kelly has poured her grief into a fight for accountability. She's filed a lawsuit against the Indiana Department of Child Services, claiming their negligence and repeated failure to act on her warnings played a direct role in her son's death. The lawsuit represents a mother's desperate attempt to force a broken system to face its failures, to answer for the death of a child it was meant to protect. It's a fight to ensure that Nakota's name becomes more than just a footnote in a tragic story, that it becomes a catalyst for change. The case of Nakota Blake Kelly carries almost unbearable sadness. This is the story of a little boy with a bright smile who saw his own death coming, whose cries for help went unheard. It's the story of a mother who fought with every fiber of her being to protect her child, only to be defeated by a system that turned deaf ears to her pleas and blind eyes to the danger. It's the story of someone who concealed monstrous intentions behind the mask of a loving father. And it stands as a searing indictment of a child welfare system that failed in its most sacred duty. Nakota's grandmother, Debbie Bogue, captured it perfectly in her raw grief during those first days after his disappearance. He was just a shining little smile that's now gone. The smile is gone, but the fight for the boy who wore it, and for all the children living in the shadows of fear, continues. Story 7. In the luminous heart of Barcelona, a city that wears its history like a beautifully aging tapestry, life for Anna Pa was a study in quiet ambition and vibrant creativity. As a fashion designer, her world was one of textures, colors, and the elegant architecture of form. She navigated the city's bustling creative scene with gentle confidence, her days filled with the promise of a rising career and the steady, comforting presence of her longtime partner. Anna was a private person, cautious and devoted. Her life was a carefully curated collection of trusted friends and cherished routines. She was, by all accounts, a woman who knew exactly who she was. She had no idea that someone else was trying to become her. Someone who was meticulously, parasitically, and fatally erasing her from her own life before she was killed. That someone was Maria Angeles Molina, a woman known to her friends and colleagues as Angie. She was Anna's co-worker, a woman who moved through the world with disarming charm and an aura of sophisticated success. Angie was a master of facades, a social chameleon who could project an image of wealth and stability, while her own life was quietly crumbling into a vortex of debt and delusion. She was born with a silver spoon, inheriting a comfortable fortune. But her extravagant lifestyle and pathological need to maintain an illusion of grandeur had drained her resources. By 2006, her financial world was collapsing. She'd been fired from her job in the Human Resources Department, a position that had given her intimate access to the personal data of her colleagues. She was adrift, but she refused to let her polished exterior tarnish. It was then that her gaze fell upon Anna Paas, a woman whose stable life and good name would become the raw materials for Angie's most audacious and monstrous creation, a second self built for fraud and designed for murder. The deception began subtly, a slow, insidious creep into the architecture of Anna's life. For 2 years, Angie lived a double existence. By day, she was the charming, if financially strained, friend. But in secret, she was becoming Anna Paas. She used her knowledge from her HR days, her access to Anna's personal information, and her own chilling talent for manipulation to systematically steal Anna's identity. She forged documents, opened bank accounts, and applied for numerous lines of credit, all in Anna's name. The loans, amounting to tens of thousands of euros, were funneled into Angie's accounts, funding a lifestyle she could no longer afford. She was a phantom moving through the city's financial institutions, a ghost wearing Anna's name. Her most brazen performance was captured by the cold, unblinking eye of a bank's security camera. In 2007, CCTV footage showed a woman confidently striding into a Barcelona bank to withdraw 600 euros from an account. The account belonged to Anna Paas, but the woman was not Anna. It was Angie, her identity concealed beneath a dark, stylish wig, her face set with a look of casual entitlement. She was playing a role, and she was playing it for broke. But the loans were only the first act. Angie's endgame was far more lucrative and infinitely more sinister. She took out several life insurance policies in Anna's name, together worth over 800,000 euros. The beneficiaries were a strange and confusing mix. One was a woman named Susanna Bascunana, a name unknown to Anna's family. Susanna was stunned to learn she had been named in the policy, denying any knowledge of Anna or Angie. It seemed Angie had stolen her identity as well, using it as a smokescreen. But the second beneficiary was a name that would chill investigators to the bone: Maria Angeles Molina. Angie had made herself the financial heir to the death of a woman who was still very much alive, a woman she called her friend. As Angie's web of deceit grew more complex, her behavior became more erratic, her lies more grandiose. She seduced bank managers, convincing them to grant her loans with her practiced charm. She dated a string of men, spinning elaborate fictions about her background, her wealth, and her life. To her then-boyfriend Miguel, she was a woman of mystery and means. He had no idea that the woman he was sharing his life with was a predator, a financial vampire who was slowly draining the life from another woman. The evening of February 19th, 2008, was to be the final act. Angie, her plans meticulously laid, her alibi carefully constructed, set her trap. Earlier that day, she had driven her Porsche to the city of Zaragoza to collect her father's ashes. a somber errand that would provide the temporal cover she needed. But her grief was a performance. Phone records would later show that she had ample time to return to Barcelona before nightfall. She had arranged to meet Anna, the friend whose identity she had been wearing like a second skin for 2 years. The meeting place was a rented apartment in Barcelona, a neutral space that Angie controlled completely. She invited Anna over, wrapping the invitation in the warm, familiar language of friendship. Anna, completely unaware of the darkness waiting for her, said yes. What unfolded inside that apartment was a scene of quiet, chilling calculation. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no evidence of any violent confrontation. What happened was something far more disturbing. Investigators believe that Angie drugged Anna, slipping a powerful sedative into her food or drink. Once Anna was unconscious and completely defenseless, Angie carried out the final devastating step of her plan. She placed a plastic bag over Anna's head and sealed it with duct tape, then watched as her friend slowly slipped away. The murder was complete, but for Angie, the performance had only just begun. Now came the staging. The elaborate deception designed to send police chasing shadows and bury the truth beneath layers of carefully crafted lies. She stripped Anna's body, leaving her on the floor. She removed all of Anna's belongings, her clothes, her handbag, her identification. She was erasing Anna from the scene, just as she had been erasing her from life. Then came the most shocking twist of all. To create the illusion of an encounter gone tragically wrong, Angie planted evidence at the scene. She had obtained samples from 2 men at a Barcelona establishment, telling the manager she wasn't interested in services. She was just collecting evidence to win a bet with friends. It was a lie wrapped in another lie, a disturbing detail in what seemed like a nearly perfect crime. When police finally arrived at the apartment, they found a confounding puzzle. A woman's body with a bag sealed over her head. Nearby lay black high-heeled shoes, a dark wig, a half-empty bottle of alcohol, and a single glass. But the victim had no identification. The apartment had been rented under the name Ana Maria Paz, the same name as a woman reported missing just days early. The initial theory, the one Angie had so carefully orchestrated, suggested a dangerous encounter that had ended in accidental tragedy. But for those who knew Anna, this theory was impossible to accept. Anna's family and her partner, Carlos, were absolutely certain. Anna wasn't the kind of person to engage in reckless behavior with strangers. She was cautious, private, and deeply committed to her relationship. Whispers that she might have been secretly working to earn extra money were quickly dismissed. Her salary as a designer was solid, her financial situation stable. The idea of her leading some secret, hidden life was completely at odds with the woman they knew and loved. As police dug deeper, the perfect crime began to crumble, its polished surface breaking apart under the weight of its creator's own narcissism and greed. The first clue was the apartment itself, rented in the victim's name. Then came the discovery of the life insurance policies, those massive sums of money, all pointing to one beneficiary, Maria Angeles Molina. The case took a dramatic turn when Angie's boyfriend, Miguel, likely troubled by the news reports, made a shocking discovery. Hidden in the bathroom of the home he shared with Angie, he found a collection of documents belonging to Ana Paz, her passport and her ID. These were documents Anna had never reported missing, suggesting they'd been taken by someone with intimate access to her life, someone she trusted completely. Miguel, horrified by what he'd found, turned the documents over to police. The net was tightening around Angie. Investigators now had a powerful motive and a direct connection. They revisited the bank surveillance footage. The image of the woman in the dark wig now carried sinister new meaning. They recovered the wig from the crime scene and sent it for forensic analysis. The results delivered the final devastating blow. The hairs found inside the wig matched Angie perfectly. The woman in the bank, the woman who had drained Anna's accounts, It was her. Her alibi, her carefully constructed trip to Zaragoza, collapsed under the scrutiny of phone records. Around 8:00 p.m. on the night of the murder, Anna's phone had connected to the network near where her body was found. Just feet away, Angie's phone was also active. They were together in those final hours. The illusion was completely shattered. Angie hadn't been grieving in another city. She had been in Barcelona, orchestrating the final moments of her friend's life. When questioned, Angie's composure, her mask of cool detachment, began to crack. She gave a series of conflicting, bizarre, and ultimately damning statements. She claimed she'd been shopping at the El Corte department store when the murder happened. Then she said she'd stopped to buy yogurt. In a moment of unsettling coldness that stunned the courtroom and the victim's family, she declared, "Without yogurts or condensed milk, I am nothing." It was the rambling, senseless statement of a liar caught in her own web. A glimpse into the profound self-obsession of a woman who, even when confronted with murdering her friend, could only talk about herself. The investigation into those planted evidence samples finally paid off. When the brothel manager took the stand, she confirmed what investigators suspected. Angie had indeed shown up at their establishment, paying 2 men for their genetic material. That strange story about a bet with friends, it was all part of a calculated murder scheme. Authorities tracked down the 2 sex workers, matched their DNA to the samples found at the scene, and quickly cleared them of any involvement in the killing. The staged assault was nothing more than an elaborate lie. In March 2012, years after committing what the media called the near-perfect crime, Maria Angeles Molina finally faced justice. The Barcelona High Court delivered a guilty verdict for Ana Pis's murder and document falsification. The judge didn't mince words, describing a crime of bone-chilling calculation. A murder driven by nothing but raw, unfiltered greed. Angie received 22 years behind bars. Though the Supreme Court later reduced her sentence to 18 years, her destiny was set. She was shipped off to Mas Denric prison in Tarragona to serve her time. But Angie's story of manipulation didn't end when those prison doors slammed shut. Even locked away, her talent for deception and ruthless ambition kept burning. In March 2025, during a temporary release from prison, authorities arrested her once again. This time, they claimed she'd been orchestrating another killing from within the prison walls. She'd used her brief taste of freedom to set her sights on a new target, reportedly working with a hired killer. The intended victim's name was never released, but this chilling footnote to her story proved one terrifying truth. The evil that drove her to murder Anapaz hadn't been snuffed out by years of confinement. The case of Anapaz offers a haunting glimpse into the darkness lurking behind a trusted face. It's the terrifying reality that someone you call friend might be secretly planning your downfall. This is a story of a life stolen twice over, first through the gradual, invisible theft of identity, then through the final, brutal act of murder. It stands as proof of the dedicated investigators who refused to buy into a fabricated story, who methodically tore apart what seemed like the perfect crime. And it remains the heartbreaking tale of a young woman whose gifts and trust met with a betrayal so deep, so calculating, that its echoes still haunt Barcelona's streets. A sobering reminder of a friendship that ended in a sealed plastic bag and a fortune built on nothing but lies. Story 8. The city of Hull sits on England's stark and wind-swept east coast, a place built on pure resilience. Its identity lives in the cobblestones of the old town and the sprawling docks that stretch toward the gray expanse of the North Sea. This is a city of proud, hard-working people, a community where family ties run deep, and life, for the most part, follows a familiar, steady rhythm. In the winter of 2005, the city lay wrapped in February's damp chill. Residents braced against the biting wind as their lives moved to the ordinary cadence of work and home. But on Valentine's Day, A day meant for declarations of love. That rhythm shattered. An act of violence so intimate and so cold sent aftershocks that would be felt for years, leaving a permanent scar on the city's heart. Joanne Nelson was 22 years old. Everyone who knew her described her as a supernova of life. Bright and bubbly, with a wonderful sense of humor and a smile that could light up any room. She worked at the local job center, but her ambitions reached far beyond her desk. She had once been accepted to volunteer in Ghana and still dreamed of traveling the world. She was close to her family, her parents Jean and Charlie, and her younger sister Katie. She called home every day, her life an open book to those she loved. For the past 2 years, that life had included Paul Dyson. To the outside world, Paul Dyson was the devoted fiancé. At 30, he and Joanne owned a home together on Hotham Road North. Photographs of the couple showed them smiling, the very picture of happiness. Joanne's family believed she had finally met a man who adored her. But Dyson was a master of carefully constructed facades. Beneath the surface of the charming partner lurked something far darker. A creature of deceit, a bully with a history of violence against women, and a disturbing secret. He idolized his late father, Peter Dyson, who had also been a killer. Peter had served 6 years for taking the life of his wife's lover back in 1967. The violence ran in his bloodline, a dark inheritance about to be tragically revisited. The evening of Valentine's Day 2005 began as it should have. In their home, Joanne and Paul exchanged cards, their declarations of love displayed above the fireplace. Joanne had been surprised with a new ring, but the romantic veneer of the day was thin, and it soon cracked under the pressure of something completely mundane. An argument broke out, reportedly over something as trivial as laundry. Joanne had asked Paul to put on a load of washing. He later told police he didn't know how to operate the machine. It was a petty, almost laughable point of contention. But in the volatile atmosphere of their relationship, it became the spark that ignited a firestorm of rage. The argument escalated. In the kitchen of the home they shared, Paul Dyson, a man who had worked as a doorman and held a brown belt in kickboxing, turned on the petite 22-year-old woman he professed to love. The details of what happened next are known only to him, but the outcome was brutal and absolute. He wrapped his hands around John's neck. With cold, terrifying intimacy, he squeezed. For several minutes he held on, feeling the life drain out of her. When he finally released his grasp, Joan's lifeless body slumped to the kitchen floor. He made no attempt to help her, no move to call for assistance. In the terrible silence that followed, Paul Dyson thought only of himself. His actions in the hours that followed weren't those of a man who had snapped or lost control in a moment of passion. They were the calculated, chillingly methodical steps of a killer determined to cover his tracks. His first thought wasn't of the woman he had just taken from this world, but of how to dispose of her. He went to a local shop, his movements captured on CCTV. He bought bin bags, rubber gloves, and disinfectant spray, a killer's shopping list. Then he collected a garden fork from his mother's house and returned home. He stopped to chat with a neighbor who asked if Joanne was okay. "Yes, she's fine," Dyson replied calmly, even mentioning they were thinking of getting another cat. Back inside the house, he began the hideous task of trying to erase Joanne from existence. He used string to bind her hands and feet, a final grotesque indignity practiced upon the woman he was supposed to cherish. He bundled her body into the bin liners, securing them with tape, and carried her to his car. With his fiancée's body in the boot, he set off on a calculated journey. A 30-mile drive west, where he filled up with petrol, then an hour north into the dark, silent woodlands of North Yorkshire. He was searching for a hiding place, a remote, forgotten patch of earth where he could bury his secret. He found it near the village of Bransby. He stopped the car in an isolated area near a distinctive metal gate. He carried Joanne's body more than 200 meters into the woods to a natural dip in the terrain and left her there, covering the makeshift grave with branches and twigs. Then he drove home, back to the empty house, back to the life he had just irrevocably destroyed. The performance began almost immediately. He gathered Joanne's work clothes and made them disappear, a crucial detail that would support the story he was about to weave. Then came the first act of his deception, a staged phone call with Joanne, his voice deliberately carrying to a nearby friend, theater for an audience of one. Later that evening, after casually visiting the gym, he returned to the now empty house and began his show of concern. He dialed Joanne's phone, leaving worried messages asking where she could be. He called her friends, her family, his voice carefully laced with what sounded like growing panic. Joanne's family knew something was terribly wrong. Her daily call was sacred to them. She never missed it. Shortly before 9:00 p.m. On Valentine's Day, Paul Dyson made the call he'd been planning all along. "Hello there. My fiancée, I don't know where she is. I just want to report somebody missing," he told the police operator, his voice a masterclass in manufactured distress. Without any prompting, he began adding details to flesh out his carefully crafted story. "The car's parked further up the road and the doors are unlocked. Nobody seems to know hide nor hair of her." When the operator asked if they'd argued, he was quick to deny it. "No, there's nothing like that. No, it's just completely out of character for her." When the call ended, he joined Joanne's frantic family, going door to door with grief painted across his face, asking if anyone had seen the woman he had killed just hours before. The disappearance of a bright, beloved young woman on Valentine's Day sent shockwaves through Hull. A massive search operation launched, the largest Humberside police had ever undertaken. Hundreds of officers, soldiers, and volunteers spread across the city and surrounding countryside, their hopes for a positive outcome fading with each passing hour. Detective Superintendent Ray Higgins took charge of the case. This seasoned officer would soon find himself watching a killer's performance unfold on live television. On February 17th, 3 days after Joanne's disappearance, her parents Charlie and Jean made a gut-wrenching televised plea for her safe return. "I just want to say to Joe that regardless of what you may think, no one else is cross with you, and we want you to please come home," Jean said, her voice breaking. Her words were a desperate plea to a daughter she couldn't know was already gone. But it was Paul Dyson's own TV appeal that became the investigation's turning point. He sat before the cameras, handkerchief clutched in his hand, his face a perfect mask of sorrow. He recounted that Valentine's Day morning, the exchange of cards, the kiss goodbye. "She's the only person I truly love," he wept. "I want to know where she is. I want her back." To any casual observer, it looked like the heartbreaking plea of a devastated fiancé. But Detective Superintendent Higgins wasn't just any observer. As the camera zoomed in on Dyson's hands, Higgins spotted something that made his blood run cold. 2 small crescent-shaped marks on the back of his thumbs. He knew instantly what they were. The desperate marks left by fingernails, by a victim fighting for her life, trying to pull her killer's hands away from her neck. In that chilling moment, Higgins realized he wasn't watching a grieving partner. He was watching a murderer. The deception, so carefully crafted, was beginning to unravel. Dyson's choice of words during the appeal was equally telling. "She was always smiling," he said, using past tense to describe a woman who was supposedly just missing. He also made a curious, unprompted denial. "There is no way I would do anything to harm her." A strange and defensive statement for an innocent man to make. His ex-wife, Jenny, watching the broadcast, saw through the performance immediately. "I knew he had done it because it was the same shameful expression I used to see," she later said. "He was just feeling sorry for himself." With Dyson now their prime suspect, investigators dug deep into his past, uncovering a disturbing history of violence and abuse. They learned about his assault on his ex-wife on their wedding night, his troubling habit of putting her in necklocks until she passed out, a twisted game he found amusing. They discovered his dark fascination with his killer father. The charming fiancée was a monster in disguise. The breakthrough came from the one person Dyson should have been able to trust. On February 18th, Dyson's mother, Christine, contacted police. She hadn't heard from her son directly, but a friend of his had come to her, burdened with a terrible secret. Dyson had confessed to this friend that he had ended Joanne's life during an argument about laundry. When confronted with his own mother's betrayal, Dyson's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. He confessed, reportedly crying out, "Good God, what have I done?" But even in his confession, there was one final cruel act of manipulation. He told police he couldn't remember where he had left Joanne's body. All he could recall was a vague description, something about a steel gate and a dip in the ground. The search for Joanne's body became a desperate race against time and the elements. For weeks, the massive search effort yielded nothing but frustration. But investigators had another card to play, a secret weapon in the world of forensic science. A forensic ecologist named Dr. Patricia Wiltshire. Dr. Wiltshire, who had worked on countless murder cases, was an expert in reading the silent microscopic stories told by pollen, soil, and plants. She was given access to Dyson's car, his footwear, and the garden fork he had collected from his mother's house. From the mud clinging to the car's wheels and the soles of his shoes, she extracted a unique ecological fingerprint. She discovered pollen from yew trees, which were rare in the area, along with western hemlock, birch, and hornbeam. This combination of specific plant species allowed her to build a detailed picture of where Dyson had been, an open area leading into woodland. She predicted that Joanne's body would not be buried, but would be found in a hollow covered with birch twigs. Using botanical maps, she pinpointed a wooded area north of York as the most likely location. Armed with this astonishingly precise information, Detective Superintendent Higgins and a colleague drove to the area Dr. Wiltshire had identified. They spotted a steel gate supported by 2 wooden posts with netting on either side, exactly as Dyson had described. They walked through the gate, following a path through open grassland up to the wooded area. Higgins continued straight ahead, and there, in a large dip in the ground, he saw it. Something wrapped in bin bags, partially concealed by birch twigs. After 39 days of searching, Joan had been found. The missing persons inquiry was now officially a murder investigation. The body was formally identified as Joan Nelson. A post-mortem examination confirmed she had been manually strangled. On November 7th, 2005, Paul Dyson's trial began at Hull Crown Court. It lasted just 30 minutes. He spoke only to confirm his name and to change his plea. He pleaded guilty to the murder of Joanne Nelson. There would be no lengthy trial, no agonizing cross-examinations for Joanne's family to endure. He had finally admitted the truth. The next day, he was sentenced. The judge, in passing the mandatory life sentence, did not mince his words. "You lost your temper and strangled Joan Nelson, a vivacious 22-year-old woman who you profess to love," he said. "Having done so, you committed hideous acts upon her body. You went on TV and displayed nauseating hypocrisy. You practiced this deception upon Joanne's family, leading them to think there may be some hope when there was none. The grief and torment they went through is scarcely imaginable." For what the judge called an unspeakably evil deed, Paul Dyson was given a minimum term of 16 years. In a statement after the sentencing, Joanne's family spoke of their profound loss. "We don't feel sorry for ourselves," they said. "We feel sorry for Joanne and the life she'll miss out on." In 2022, after serving 17 years, Paul Dyson was released from prison. The man who strangled the life from his fiancée over an argument about laundry, who disposed of her body in the woods, who then wept crocodile tears on national television, was a free man. For Joan Nelson's family, his release brought a fresh wave of pain, a reminder that for them the sentence is truly for life. The story of Joanne Nelson stands as a heartbreaking testament to the hidden scourge of domestic violence. A story of a bright life, extinguished by a moment of rage, and of a killer's chilling performance that was ultimately unmasked by the silent testimony of the natural world. Story 9. The sun hung low over Maui's rugged peaks, casting long shadows across the winding roads that snaked through Wailuku. It was a Sunday afternoon in January 2014, the kind of day where the island's gentle trade winds carried the sweet scent of plumeria and salt from the nearby Pacific. Moreira Elena Monsalve, known to everyone as M.O., navigated her black Dodge Neon with the ease of someone who had called this paradise home for years. At 46, Mo was a woman of quiet strength. Her brown hair fell just past her shoulders, often held back with a simple plastic clip. Black-rimmed glasses framed her warm brown eyes, eyes that had weathered life's storms but always sparkled with determination for her family. Standing 5'8" and carrying about 170 pounds, she moved through the world with purposeful grace. That day, she wore a white cotton t-shirt with black pinstripes, long-sleeved for the island's variable chill, paired with black capri cargo shorts and comfortable brown flip-flops. Her pink Coach purse might have been tucked under her arm, holding her Samsung phone in its matching pink case, a small anchor to the life she cherished. Mo's day had begun like so many others, anchored by devotion to her 3 children. Her oldest son, Tyson, was in his early 20s, navigating young adulthood's uncertainties with the same resilience his mother had instilled in him. Alexis, her daughter around 20, shared Mo's fiery spirit and unwavering loyalty. The youngest, a high schooler whose name the family kept close in their private grief, still needed a mother's steady hand to guide him through adolescence. Mo had raised them mostly alone after her divorce, working various jobs in Wailuku to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. She was the kind of mother who never missed a school event or heartfelt conversation, the one who treasured Mother's Day cards from years past, tokens of the unbreakable bonds she nurtured. Friends described her as vibrant, yet grounded. A woman who laughed easily but carried worries deep in her chest, especially when it came to matters of the heart. That afternoon, around 3:00 p.m., Mo pulled up to the University of Hawaii Maui College campus in Kahului. The campus buzzed with youthful energy, palm trees swaying against the backdrop of the West Maui Mountains. She had arranged to meet her youngest son there for what was meant to be a routine discussion, perhaps about his classes or an upcoming event. Mo parked her car, the engine ticking as it cooled, and spotted him waiting near the entrance. They talked briefly, her voice soft and encouraging the way it always was when she wanted to lift his spirits. But as minutes stretched, Mo glanced at her watch. She had promised to drop Alexis at Kahului Airport afterward. Her daughter was heading off-island for a short trip, a brief escape from the island's rhythms. With a quick hug for her son, Mo promised to return soon. "I'll be right back," she said, her words carrying the weight of reliability that defined her. Driving away, Mo's mind likely wandered to the evening ahead. The roads from Kahului to the airport were familiar, lined with sugar-cane fields that rustled in the breeze. She dropped Alexis off without incident, watching her daughter's figure disappear into the terminal, with a mix of pride and the subtle ache of letting go. By now, the sun was dipping lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Mo's plans were vague. She had mentioned to a friend earlier that week about stopping by to see Bernard Brown, her ex-boyfriend. Their relationship had ended months earlier, but threads of connection lingered, the kind that pulled people back despite the warnings in their hearts. Mo had confided in friends about Bernard, how his words could turn sharp, how his jealousy simmered like a storm on the horizon. "He's vindictive," she had whispered to one close confidant, her voice trembling with fear she tried to mask. "I don't trust him," Yet there she was, heading toward his apartment in the lower main area of Wailuku, a neighborhood of modest buildings nestled near the rushing Ohio stream. Bernard Brown's residence at Ao Parkside was unassuming, a second-floor unit in a complex where the hum of everyday life drowned out deeper troubles. Bernard, in his late 40s, was a man of contrasts, charming when he wanted to be, but prone to moods that darkened rooms. He had met Mo through mutual friends on the island, drawn to her warmth amid his own isolation. Their romance had burned brightly at first, filled with shared meals and late-night talks under the stars. But cracks formed quickly. Arguments over small things escalated into accusations. Bernard's possessiveness wrapped around Emma like vines. She had told Alexis once, in a quiet moment, "He's mentally abusive, honey. It scares me sometimes." Mo had ended it, seeking peace for herself and her children. But Bernard wasn't one to let go easily. The calls came first, then the texts, followed by those unexpected visits that made Mo's stomach twist into knots. As Emma arrived at Bernard's place around 8:00 p.m., darkness had already claimed the sky. The air hung heavy with the rich scent of rain-soaked earth from an earlier shower. In the distance, the haunting calls of coke frogs filled the quiet evening. She climbed the stairs, her flip-flops creating a soft rhythm against the concrete, then knocked. When Bernard opened the door, his expression was a puzzle of surprise mixed with something harder to read. Maybe relief, maybe calculation. They settled into the living room, a space crowded with his life's clutter. Stacks of magazines teetered on surfaces, while a worn couch faced a small television flickering with some forgotten program. Emma brought up her car troubles. Lately, it had been giving her grief, sputtering along the highways that wound across the island. "I think it's the transmission," she said, trying to sound casual despite the weariness in her voice. Bernard nodded, offering his help in that steady tone of his. They shared a meal together, or maybe just coffee. The exact details would later blur in memory, but their conversation gradually turned personal, reopening old wounds that had never quite healed. By 10 p.m., tension filled the room like smoke. Emma wanted to leave, to return to her son at the college as she'd promised. But Bernard suggested she stay just a little longer. According to his version of events, she complained about the car again, insisting it desperately needed repair. In the foggy aftermath of what happened next, Bernard claimed he dozed off on the couch, only to wake and find her gone. He said she must have called someone for a ride while he slept. A black Dodge Nitro, a 1994 Buick Park Avenue Ultra, or a white Ford Ranger with California plates. Vehicles that witnesses would later vaguely remember seeing in the area. Emma stepped out into the night, her silhouette disappearing down the stairs, purse slung over her shoulder, phone clutched in her hand. The door clicked shut behind her, and silence settled over the apartment. Or so the story went. But Emma never made it back to the college. Her son waited, his phone stubbornly silent, campus lights buzzing overhead as minutes stretched into hours. He called her, sent texts, paced the parking lot where her car was supposed to return. Worry gnawed at him, that deep, instinctive fear that something was terribly wrong. By morning, he reached out to Alexis, who had already returned from her trip. She could hear the panic threading through his voice. Mo's neon sat exactly where she'd left it, keys still in the ignition, like a silent guardian keeping watch. Meanwhile, Bernard woke to the reality of his empty apartment. He later told police that Emma had texted him during the night, saying a friend had picked her up. But no records would ever support that claim. Instead, he drove her car to a repair shop in Wailuku the next morning, January 13th, dropping it off with instructions to check the transmission. The mechanic scratched his head in confusion. Nothing seemed wrong. When police retrieved the vehicle on January 14th, it ran perfectly, as if mocking the entire excuse. January 14th dawned with a family's growing dread turning into action. Alexis, ever the protective daughter, filed a missing persons report with the Maui Police Department. She described Emma in careful detail. The pinstriped shirt, the cargo shorts, the flip-flops, the hair clip that held back her waves. "She's a devoted mom," Alexis told the officers, her voice steady but her eyes rimmed with fear. "She wouldn't just vanish like this. She has responsibilities. Us." The police, led by Detective Aaron Satterfield, began carefully piecing together the timeline. Mo's phone had last pinged near Bernard's apartment around 10 p.m. on the 12th. No outgoing calls, no texts to friends. Her credit cards lay dormant, her bank account untouched. This wasn't a spontaneous departure. This was an erasure. 2 days later, on January 16th, a tip led officers to a dumpster behind the Velma McWayne Santos Community Center, just a short walk from Bernard's building. Inside, buried among the refuse of everyday life, they discovered Mo's pink Coach purse, her shattered Samsung phone, and a heartbreaking collection of personal items. Birth certificates for her children, old bank statements, faded Mother's Day cards with childish scrawls of love, even the title to Alexis's truck. The items had been haphazardly discarded, as if someone had tried to sever ties in desperate haste. Forensic teams carefully sifted through the debris, but found no blood, no DNA, just the ghostly remnants of Mo's life. Suspicion circled Bernard almost immediately. Friends came forward with stories Emma had shared in hushed, frightened tones. The mental abuse, the threats. "He said he'd hurt me if I left for good," she had confided to one friend, her hands trembling. Another recalled Mo's chilling words, "I'm terrified of him." Bernard, for his part, cooperated at first. He answered questions, provided his phone records, but inconsistencies began piling up like storm clouds. Why drop off the car if Emma had left on foot? Why no mention of her fear? And then, in early February, Bernard packed his bags and fled to Northern California, leaving Maui behind like a nightmare he wanted to forget. The investigation stretched on, a slow unraveling under Maui's relentless sun. Detectives combed through Bernard's apartment, finding nothing obvious, no signs of struggle, no hidden stains. But cell phone data, painstakingly recovered by the FBI, painted a damning picture. Between 10:00 p.m. on January 12th and the early hours of January 13th, Mo's phone came alive with activity. Multiple websites, financial portals, airline booking sites, all accessed in a flurry of digital desperation. But one search stood out like a red flag in the darkness. Someone had searched for airline tickets with Bernard's name as the passenger, as if plotting an escape or covering tracks. The phone's location data told its own story. It was firmly planted at Bernard's residence, not wandering the streets as he claimed. The search for Mo spread across the island like wildfire. Cadavered dogs pushed through the dense foliage around Ohio Valley, their sensitive noses probing the damp earth where streams rushed over ancient volcanic rocks. Divers plunged into the murky waters off Wailuku's shores, searching through silt and secrets. Helicopters thundered overhead, their rotors beating against the wind as they scanned the rugged terrain of the West Maui Mountains. Volunteers joined the effort, including Mo's own children, their young faces itched with exhaustion and desperate hope. Alexis took charge of a Facebook page. Missing person Moira Montserrat. Please share for tips. In one heartbreaking post, she wrote simply, "Mom, where are you?" The words cut like a raw wound. Years passed. The island seasons turned like pages in a forgotten book. Mo's children grew up in her absence. Tyson became a young man, shouldering family burdens no teenager should carry. Alexis transformed into a fierce advocate. Her younger brother graduated high school without his mother's proud smile. The pain lingered, a constant undercurrent in their lives. Alexis spoke in interviews about the void that Mo's disappearance had left. Holidays without Mo's laughter. Birthdays marked by absence. "This man has changed my life," she said in 2019, her voice cracking with unresolved grief. Meanwhile, Bernard rebuilt his life in California's shadows. He took odd jobs, kept a low profile in Sacramento, but the long arm of the law eventually caught up. In September 2019, a Maui grand jury indicted him for second-degree murder. FBI agents and Sacramento police arrested him at dawn, handcuffs clicking like final punctuation. Extradited back to Maui with bail set at $1 million, Bernard pleaded not guilty. "I didn't do it," he maintained. His defense attorney, Randall Hyakutake, decried the lack of physical evidence. No body, no murder weapon, just circumstantial threads. The trial began on August 1st, 2022, in the Second Circuit Court in Wailuku, with Judge Peter Cahill presiding. The courtroom became a crucible of tension. Wooden benches filled with Mo's supporters, family members in quiet clusters, friends clutching tissues. Bernard sat stone-faced, his eyes carefully avoiding the gallery where Alexis and Tyson would soon testify. Over 4 weeks, 35 witnesses took the stand. Detectives recounted the phone data. Friends shared Mo's fears. Mechanics confirmed the car's suspiciously pristine condition. The prosecution, led by Deputy Prosecutor Robert Rivera, wove a narrative of deception. Bernard's odd statements, his hasty departure from the island, the dumpster's contents, evidence of a botched attempt to erase his mistakes. The diversions, the lies, Rivera argued in his closing, they all point to guilt. The defense countered fiercely. "This is a witch hunt," Hyakutake thundered, emphasizing the absence of a body and the reliance on inference. Bernard himself spoke little throughout the trial, his silence like a wall. But the jury saw through it. After just 1 day of deliberation, at 2:01 p.m., on August 25th, 2022, they returned with their verdict. Guilty of second-degree murder. Unanimous. Sentencing came on November 23rd, 2022. The courtroom was heavy with finality. Judge Cahill, his voice measured and grave, sentenced Bernard to life without parole. "The evidence shows you took her life," he said, as Mo's family absorbed the weight of those words. Alexis stood, tears streaming down her face, finding a measure of justice amid unending loss. In January 2023, the sentence was formalized. Bernard was led away to serve eternity behind bars. Yet Mo's body remains unfound, a silent testament to mysteries still unresolved. Searches continue sporadically, but the island guards its secrets well. Her children carry on, honoring her memory in their own ways. Alexis, through advocacy. Tyson, in quiet strength. The youngest simply living the life Mo dreamed for him. The case is now etched in Maui's lore. A reminder that some disappearances echo forever. Their human cost a profound and lingering ache. Story 10. The winter sun hung low over the flat expanse of Colorado City, Texas, casting a pale, ghostly light across dusty streets and weathered homes scattered like forgotten promises across the landscape. December 27th, 2010. A quiet Monday afternoon in this small town where life moved to the rhythm of oil fields and Friday night football. Haley Darlene Dunn, just 13 years old, stepped off the school bus near her home on West 2nd Street. Her backpack hung casually over one shoulder, her cheerleader uniform peeking out from beneath her winter jacket. Long brown hair pulled back in a bouncing ponytail, bright blue eyes sparkling with all the innocence of youth. Haley was every bit the typical middle school girl, full of dreams and giggles with friends, carrying that unshakable optimism that comes with standing on the edge of adolescence. She stood about 5'4", slender at around 120 pounds, her fair skin flushed pink from the crisp West Texas chill. That morning at Colorado City Middle School had been filled with cheer practice and holiday chatter, ordinary moments that would soon feel precious beyond measure. She had no idea that the steady rhythm of her life was about to shatter completely. Home was a modest single-story house with a chain-link fence out front and a patchy lawn that whispered stories of hard times and harder work. She shared this space with her mother, Billie Jean Dunn, a 31-year-old woman navigating the choppy waters of single parenthood after her divorce from Haley's father, Clint Dunn. Billie worked long, grinding hours at the local convenience store, pouring quiet determination into every shift, doing whatever it took to provide for her two children. Haley's older brother, David, 16 and lanky with that awkward teenage grace, often disappeared into video games or homework in their cramped quarters. Then there was Sean Atkins, Billie's boyfriend of about a year. At 24, he had a stocky build, dark hair, and a mood that could shift from friendly to brooding in a heartbeat. His work at the nearby oil rig was sporadic at best. Sean's constant presence in the house carried strange undercurrents. Neighbors whispered about his temper, his odd habits, tension that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Around 3:00 p.m., Haley pushed through the front door. The familiar scent of microwave dinners and lingering cigarette smoke greeted her. She kicked off her sneakers in the entryway, calling out a casual hello to whoever might be listening. Sean was sprawled on the worn living room couch, afternoon television droning in the background. He glanced up with a nod as Haley dropped her bag and launched into her usual after-school chatter. Something at a funny moment at cheer practice, maybe the Christmas gifts she was hoping for. According to what Sean would later tell investigators, Haley mentioned heading out soon. She planned to walk to her father's house just a few blocks away, then spend the night at her friend Mary Beth's place. Clint's home was close enough for a quick visit, just another routine stop in Haley's divided world, where she moved between parents with the practiced ease of a child used to such arrangements. Sean claimed he watched her grab a light jacket, flash that bright smile, and step back into the fading daylight. The screen door creaked shut behind her. That moment, Haley's figure disappearing down the sidewalk, ponytail swinging as she walked into Colorado City's quiet streets, would be the last confirmed sighting of her alive. But Haley never made it to her father's house. Clint Dunn, a rugged man in his early 30s who made his living as a truck driver, waited at home that evening. He was expecting his daughter for their usual holiday catch-up. The clock ticked past 4:00 p.m. Then 5:00. That empty chair at the dinner table became a growing void that filled his chest with dread. He called Haley's cell phone. It rang unanswered into silence. His texts went unread. By nightfall, worry had settled deep into his bones like the West Texas cold. Meanwhile, back at the house on West 2nd Street, Billie returned from her shift around 9:00 p.m., exhausted and completely unaware of the storm brewing around her family. When she asked about Haley, Sean was evasive, mumbling something vague about her being at a friend's house. David, sensing something felt off, shrugged it away as typical sibling drama. But as the hours stretched deep into the night, Haley's absence became impossible to ignore. Clint paced his empty home, fear building with each passing minute. Finally, around midnight, he reached out to Billie, his voice tight and strained. "Where's Haley? She's not here." Billie's heart plummeted. She hadn't seen her daughter since morning. A frantic call to Mary Beth's mother revealed the devastating truth. There were no plans, no invitation, no sleepover visit. Haley had simply vanished. The next morning, December 28th, Billie Jean Dunn walked through the doors of the Mitchell County Sheriff's Office. Her face was pale and drawn, hands trembling as she filled out the missing persons report. The small station buzzed with typical holiday aftermath, lost pets, minor thefts. But Haley's case cut through all that noise like a blade. Deputy Chris Hassel carefully took down the details, noting Haley's description. Last seen wearing a black and white cheerleading top, jeans, and a gray hoodie. Carrying nothing but her phone, and maybe a few dollars for snacks. The community, bound together the way only small towns can be, sprang into action immediately. Friends from school shared memories of Haley's infectious personality. She was the girl who brought pep rallies to life with her flips and spirited chants. The one who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, or perhaps a dancer. Anything that would let her boundless energy shine bright. Neighbors remembered her lending a hand with yard work, always waving hello during her bike rides through the neighborhood. Overnight, posters appeared everywhere. Telephone poles, store windows, anywhere people might see them. Missing, Haley Dunn, 13, brown hair, blue eyes, reward for information. Search parties spread across the vast flatlands, carefully combing through empty lots, dry creek beds, and along the edges of Lake Trammell about 25 miles away, where gentle waves lapped against the rocky shoreline. Investigators began with the fundamentals. Family interviews revealed the picture of a normal life, though not without its strains. Clint and Billy, despite their divorce, had managed to maintain a respectful co-parenting relationship for their children's well-being. Any disagreements stayed firmly behind closed doors. David spoke about his sister with that special mix of brotherly love and typical teenage teasing. They shared a bedroom, squabbled over bathroom time, but he would have walked through fire for her without hesitation. Sean Atkins, however, kept drawing those lingering looks from the deputies. After all, he was the last person to see her. His story seemed solid on the surface. Haley had left in good spirits, heading to her dad's place. But nagging questions remained. Why hadn't she called Clint? Her phone had gone completely silent, its last ping registering near the house around 3:30 p.m. Sean appeared cooperative, willingly handing over his cell phone records. Yet his eyes kept darting around, his answers coming short and clipped. Polygraph tests came up early in the investigation. Both Billy and Clint passed theirs easily, their raw grief impossible to fake. Sean? He declined at first, then failed dramatically when he finally took one in January 2011. The machine detected clear deception in his denials. As weeks stretched into months, the investigation went deeper, peeling back the layers of the Dunn household, like an onion, revealing troubling things beneath. Detectives uncovered Sean's darker side. Neighbors began whispering about heated arguments echoing from the house, Sean's jealousy over Billy's attention to the children, his angry outbursts when alcohol was involved. A thorough search of the home revealed deeply disturbing items. Printouts about serial killers, carefully tucked away in a drawer. A USB drive hidden in Sean's room containing inappropriate images of children, content that sickened even experienced officers. Billy's computer held similar files, traced back to shared usage, but investigators' focus sharpened on Sean. His record showed petty troubles, marijuana possession, minor thefts, but nothing violent. Yet Haley's friends began coming forward with chilling stories. The week before she disappeared, Haley had confided in a classmate about feeling uncomfortable around Sean. "He looks at me weird," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper, like he's angry all the time. Another friend remembered Haley mentioning Sean's unsettling stories about death and disappearance, dark tales he'd spin during family dinners that left her deeply troubled. By March 2011, police completely shifted their approach. This was no longer a runaway case. Haley had no history of rebellion, no secret relationships, no hidden problems. They officially declared her endangered, presumed dead. Press conferences dominated local news coverage. Sheriff Billy Davis, his face grim under the harsh fluorescent lights of the station, made direct appeals for information. Haley didn't leave on her own. Someone out there knows something. The community continued rallying together, but cracks began showing in the family's united front. Billy, facing mounting scrutiny, dealt with questions about inconsistencies in her follow-up polygraph tests, her timeline shifting slightly with each telling. Clint, ever the protective father, grew increasingly frustrated, openly accusing the investigation of stalling. Meanwhile, Sean hired a lawyer, his initial cooperation completely evaporating. In a truly bizarre turn, he and Billy got married in March 2011, just months after Haley's disappearance. This courthouse wedding fueled intense speculation about possible collusion. To outsiders, it screamed deflection, a desperate attempt to bind their loyalties together against growing suspicion. Spring brought exhaustive search efforts. Volunteers in bright orange vests trudged through mesquite thickets and arroyos. Cadaver dogs strained against their leashes near the Colorado River. Helicopters buzzed overhead through the night, their searchlights sweeping the darkness like accusing fingers. Tips flooded in constantly. Reported sightings in Lubbock. Rumors of a girl matching Haley's description spotted in Abilene. But every single lead hit a dead end. The emotional toll kept mounting relentlessly. David, now carrying the crushing weight of loss, retreated into silence. His grades began slipping as grief slowly consumed him. Clint threw himself completely into advocacy, covering Highway 163 with billboards bearing Haley's face and the bold words "Justice for Haley" against the endless Texas sky. Billy, torn between mourning her daughter and defending her own innocence, spoke to reporters with tears streaming down her cheeks. "My baby wouldn't run away. She's out there somewhere, and I need her back." But privately, doubts continued festering. Whispered rumors spread about drug use in the home, about neglect that may have left Haley vulnerable. The town, once united, split apart like a broken mirror. Some pointed fingers at Billy, calling her a careless mother. Others saw her as just another victim of terrible circumstances. Years crawled by, and the case grew cold, gathering dust on forgotten shelves. By 2012, Sean and Billy's marriage had crumbled under the relentless weight of police questioning and public shame. They divorced. Sean moved to a rundown apartment at the town's edge, working lonely night shifts at a warehouse. His life became nothing but shadows and isolation. Billy tried to escape, relocating briefly with David, hoping for a fresh start. But the stigma clung to her like a curse she couldn't shake. Clint remarried, pouring his grief into raising awareness about missing children. But at every family gathering, that empty chair spoke louder than any conversation. Haley's bedroom stayed exactly as she'd left it, a frozen shrine of posters, stuffed animals, and homework she'd never finished. Friends slowly drifted away. The cheer squad dedicated their performances to her memory. But life, different as always, marched on. Then came March 16th, 2013. A breakthrough, or at least closure of sorts. Curtis Lloyd was out hunting fossils near Lake Trammell in Scurry County, about 25 miles from Colorado City, when he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. Skeletal remains scattered in a dry creek bed, partially buried under sand and scrub brush. The bones were small, fragile, still clad in remnants of clothing. A black and white cheer top, jeans faded by years of exposure. Lloyd's hands trembled as he backed away, fumbling for his phone to call 911. "I think it's a kid," he told the dispatcher, his voice hollow with shock. Forensic teams swarmed the remote site, yellow tape fluttering in the desert wind. The remains, weathered by 3 brutal years of elements, were carefully transported to the University of North Texas Center for human identification. On April 26, 2013, dental records and DNA from Clint confirmed everyone's worst fears. It was Haley. The cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Likely a single devastating blow from an unknown object, inflicted around the time she vanished. No defensive wounds, suggesting the attack came swift and sudden, probably from someone she trusted. The location where she was found, dumped far from home and hidden in isolation, spoke of a deliberate intent to conceal the crime. The discovery ripped open old wounds that had never really healed. Clint broke down in the sheriff's office, then sat in his truck afterward, fists clenched against the steering wheel. 3 years, he muttered to reporters later. 3 years of hoping, and now this. Billy watched the news in stunned silence. Later, she admitted the confirmation brought a twisted kind of relief. No more wondering if Haley was suffering somewhere out there. David, now 19, struggled with rage, punching walls and fits of anger he couldn't control. The community mourned with vigils and purple ribbons, the color of Haley's cheer uniform, tied to fences and lampposts throughout town. But the burning questions remained. Who struck that fatal blow? The proximity to Lake Trammell, accessible by dirt roads from Colorado City, pointed to someone local, someone familiar with that remote terrain. The Texas Rangers took over, treating this as a full homicide investigation. Searches of the disposal site yielded frustratingly little. No murder weapon, no fibers that led anywhere definitive. But their focus zeroed in on Sean. New witnesses emerged from the shadows. A coworker recalled Sean's offhand comments back in 2011 about getting rid of problems, vague words that now seemed ominous. Phone records, examined with fresh eyes, showed Sean's cell pinging near Lake Trammell in the days after Haley disappeared. Unusual for his normal routine. In 2014, grand juries heard testimony, but the evidence remained stubbornly circumstantial. No eyewitness. No DNA on the remains matching Sean directly. Just patterns of lies and evasion that painted a troubling picture. Billy faced her own scrutiny, accusations that she'd covered for Sean, her failed polygraph tests making her look complicit. She insisted on her innocence, but the damage was done. Her reputation lay in ruins. Time stretched the agony thin. By 2019, the case had faded from newspaper headlines, but Clint never stopped fighting. He lobbied lawmakers for better cold case funding, his voice growing hoarse at town halls. David joined the military, seeking structure in the chaos his life had become. Sean, now in his 30s, bounced between jobs, avoiding the spotlight but haunted by whispers that followed him everywhere. Then, in early 2021, came the break they'd all been waiting for. Advanced forensics on items from the original house search revealed new evidence. Carpet fibers from Sean's truck and soil samples from the creek bed showed matches to the disposal site. A search warrant for Sean's DNA was executed in June. On June 13th, 2021, in Howard County, Sean was arrested. Cuffed in his own kitchen, he maintained his silence as deputies read the charges. First-degree murder and tampering with a corpse. Bail was set at $2 million. He sat in jail as the weight of a decade crashed down around him. The indictment came in September 2021, formalizing what many had suspected all along. Prosecutors alleged that Sean had struck Haley in a fit of rage, perhaps over something minor, like coming home late or challenging his authority. Then, they claimed, he drove her body to Lake Trammell under cover of darkness, dumping it there to erase his crime. Billy, cleared of direct involvement, agreed to testify against him. Her voice remained steady despite the betrayal she felt. He was obsessed with dark things, she said in her deposition. I didn't see it coming. No. The trial was set for April 2023. The courtroom in Mitchell County was buzzing with anticipation. Witnesses had prepared their testimonies. Friends stood ready to recount Haley's deepest fears. Experts waited to explain the brutal mechanics of trauma. Clint had prepared an impact statement that would have left the jury shaken to their core. But justice stumbled and fell. In late May 2023, Sean rejected a plea deal that would have put him away for 30 years. Then, on June 27, 2023, prosecutors made a stunning decision. They dropped all charges without prejudice, citing insufficient evidence to move forward with trial. The reason was clear. Untested items from both the house and vehicle desperately needed re-examination with newer technology. Blood traces that might have been overlooked back in 2010. Fibers that had never been properly analyzed. Sean Atkins remained their primary suspect, but as the motion plainly stated, we need more. Released from jail, Sean simply vanished into complete anonymity. The case reopened, then stalled once again. At a heated press conference, Clint slammed his fist down hard on the table, his eyes blazing red with fury and frustration. "This isn't over," he declared through gritted teeth. "Haley deserves so much better than this." The family, fractured by grief, but somehow unbroken, vowed to keep fighting no matter what. This unsolved killing had become a permanent scar on Colorado City's very soul. As of October 2025, Haley's case still lingers in heartbreaking limbo, a haunting reminder of just how vulnerable we can be, even in the safety of our own homes. Clint still drives those familiar back roads, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, searching desperately for any sign of closure. David, now home from his military service, honors his sister's memory with quiet, unwavering resolve. The purple ribbons may fade with time, but the quest for truth endures, a powerful testament to a young girl's bright light that was snuffed out far too soon. Out there in the vast Texas plains, where secrets lie buried deep beneath the surface, Haley's story continues to whisper a simple truth. Some mysteries demand to be solved, no matter how long it takes. Story 11. The early spring air in Winnipeg carried a bone-deep chill, the kind that lingered even as the first hints of green pushed through the thawing earth along the North End streets. On April 23, 2000, in a modest hospital room overlooking the bustling Red River, Samantha Comic brought her second child into the world. The baby girl emerged with tiny fists clenched against life's uncertainty. At just 18 years old, Samantha had already weathered a turbulent adolescence, marked by her own encounters with the child welfare system. Her first daughter, born prematurely 2 years earlier, had been taken into care at birth and never returned. The father, Steve Sinclair, was a soft-spoken man in his mid-20s with a history of unstable work and his own unresolved wounds. He chose the name Phoenix for their newborn, inspired by the mythical bird rising from ashes, a symbol of hope he desperately clung to amid their broken lives. Phoenix Victoria Hope Sinclair entered the world weighing barely 5 pounds. Her cries were weak, but insistent, her dark eyes wide with an innocence that would soon face forces beyond her control. From her very first breath, Phoenix's life became entangled with Manitoba's child welfare machinery. Hospital staff, alerted by Samantha's social history, immediately contacted Child and Family Services. Social workers arrived swiftly, their clipboards heavy with forms assessing risk factors. Samantha's youth, her lack of stable housing, Steve's sporadic presence, and reports of substance use in the extended family. Within hours, Phoenix was apprehended, a cold legal term that masked the profound separation it created. Samantha held her daughter briefly, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Steve stood silently in the corner, hands buried deep in his pockets. The baby was placed in a temporary shelter, then moved to foster care with a kind suburban couple. There, she received her first bottle under watchful, unfamiliar eyes. Samantha and Steve were granted supervised visits, but these meetings felt strained, filled with hollow promises of change that echoed through sterile visitation rooms. Throughout the summer, the couple worked toward reunification. They attended parenting classes where instructors covered basics like safe sleep and feeding schedules. But the sessions often felt superficial, more checklist than genuine support. Samantha, with her long dark hair and quiet demeanor, spoke little, her gaze fixed on the floor. Steve nodded along, masking his growing frustration. By September 5th, 2000, after months of assessments showed progress, Phoenix was returned to her parents. They had secured a small apartment on McGee Street, in the North End, a neighborhood of weathered row houses and resilient community ties, where highway traffic hummed alongside children's laughter from backyards. The return came with strict conditions: regular CFS check-ins, no substance use, and participation in family support programs. Phoenix, now 5 months old, babbled softly as Samantha cradled her, the weight of responsibility settling like an unspoken burden. For a brief moment, the family found a fragile rhythm. Steve took odd jobs as a laborer, his calloused hands earning money for diapers and formula. Samantha focused on motherhood, her days revolving around Phoenix's needs. But cracks appeared quickly. Arguments echoed through thin walls, Steve's temper flaring over finances, Samantha retreating into silence. In December 2000, a psychiatrist evaluated Samantha, noting her history of depression and the pressures of young parenthood. The recommendation was continued monitoring rather than intervention. CFS workers visited sporadically, jotting notes on compliance, but never delving deeply into the home's true dynamics. Phoenix, with her cherubic face and tufts of dark hair, seemed content. Her laughter became a rare light in the dim apartment. By early 2001, the file was marked as low risk. Yet whispers of concern lingered among extended family who noticed Samantha's occasional absences and Steve's growing exhaustion. April 29th, 2001, brought both joy and complication. Samantha gave birth to Phoenix's sister, Echo, another tiny girl whose arrival filled the household. Steve became the primary caregiver, juggling bottles for two while Samantha recovered. The added strain amplified existing tensions. Echo's cries often mingled with Phoenix's, turning the apartment into a symphony of unmet needs. In June, police responded to a domestic disturbance call. Steve and Samantha had argued violently, furniture overturned, voices raised in accusation. Officers separated them, but no charges were filed. CFS was only notified peripherally. By July, the couple had separated. Steve was left to care for both girls alone in the McGee Street apartment. Phoenix, now over a year old, toddled around with boundless curiosity, while Echo nursed contentedly. But on July 15th, tragedy struck. Echo died suddenly from a respiratory infection, her small body succumbing despite Steve's frantic emergency calls. The autopsy confirmed natural causes, but the loss left the family hollow and broken. Steve grieved openly, pulling Phoenix close as if he could somehow shield her from the world's cruelty. Samantha, now living elsewhere, came and went like a shadow. Her visits sporadic, her own sorrow tangled up with guilt that seemed to weigh her down. After Echo's death, the warning signs began to pile up. Relatives started talking about Steve's drinking, about how overwhelmed he seemed, about how Phoenix looked disheveled and neglected during family visits. CFS received call after call. One came in late July about the disturbance at the funeral chapel where police had to be called after a family fight erupted. Another highlighted the desperate need for support in the aftermath of such devastating loss. Workers opened files and made their rounds, conducting home visits. They found Steve cooperative enough, Phoenix seemingly safe, but their assessments barely scratched the surface. No surprise visits, no real digging into how either of them was coping emotionally. Phoenix spent most of her time with family friends Kim and Rohan Edwards, a couple who lived nearby and offered something she desperately needed: stability. Kim was a warm woman with a nurturing heart who would bathe Phoenix and read her stories. For brief moments, their home felt like a true haven. By February 2003, Phoenix ended up in the hospital emergency ward. A piece of styrofoam had been lodged in her nose for months, causing a painful infection. Medical staff immediately alerted CFS, alarmed by what they saw as clear neglect. After treatment, she was discharged to the Edwards' care, the agency at least recognizing it as a safe place. June 21, 2003, marked another crucial turning point. Phoenix was taken into care again following reports of a drinking party at Steve's home, where neighbors had spotted the toddler wandering around completely unattended. Placed in temporary guardianship with the Edwards, she began to flourish. She gained weight, and her laughter started filling their home once more. Samantha stepped back into the picture, expressing interest in getting Phoenix back, but her visits remained inconsistent and unpredictable. Steve was assessed as unready to parent alone and agreed to the current arrangement. But by October 2003, the plan shifted suddenly and without warning. Phoenix was returned to Steve. The file was closed with brief notations about progress. The Edwards fought back, sensing the instability that everyone else seemed to miss. But their voices were pushed aside and ignored. Phoenix, now 3 years old, returned to the familiar chaos of McGee Street. Her small world had been turned upside down once again. Early 2004 brought even more upheaval. Steve, struggling with depression that seemed to consume him, privately arranged for Phoenix to stay with the Edwards while he traveled to Ontario looking for work. Meanwhile, Samantha had begun a relationship with Carl McKay, a man in his late 20s with a stocky build and dark eyes that could turn cold in an instant. Carl had a criminal record that included multiple assaults. Known as West to his friends, he had a documented history of domestic violence, including an incident where he had beaten a former partner severely. He was already flagged in welfare databases as a genuine threat to children. Yet in April 2004, Samantha collected Phoenix from the Edwards for what was supposed to be just a short visit. The little girl, with her wide eyes and hesitant smile, clung to her mother's hand, completely unaware of the darkness that lay ahead. The couple moved into a rundown apartment on Inkster Boulevard, Phoenix's presence adding to an already precarious and unstable household. Carl's teenage sons from a previous relationship visited occasionally, their discomfort obvious amid the growing tensions that seemed to fill every room. Child welfare files flickered open and closed like faulty lights, never staying active long enough to make a real difference. In May 2004, Employment and Income Assistance, II, questioned Phoenix's whereabouts after receiving conflicting reports, leading to yet another referral. Workers opened a protection file but closed it almost immediately, claiming no apparent concerns after just a single visit, where Samantha appeared calm and composed, Phoenix quiet but present. No one bothered to check Carl's background thoroughly, missing red flags that should have kept that file active and under close watch. By fall, Phoenix was registered for nursery school at Wellington Avenue, but neither she nor Samantha ever showed up. Teachers later reported empty seats and unanswered phone calls that went on for weeks. November brought another baby for Samantha and Carl, a boy whose cries now joined Phoenix's in the cramped, suffocating space. Hospital staff alerted CFS again, but the intake unit relied on a public health nurse's quick surface-level check, closing the file without ever seeing Phoenix face-to-face. Carl's troubling history remained unchecked, and another crucial opportunity to intervene simply slipped away. Spring 2005 painted an increasingly dark picture. Friends and relatives began noticing bruises on Phoenix's arms and her withdrawn behavior during the rare times she was seen in public. A foster mother who had cared for her before called CFS on March 5th, voicing serious fears about abuse. But the report left out recent details, and workers couldn't gain entry to the apartment. After supervisor consultations, they decided to close the case. The Child Response Unit interpreted their mandate narrowly. No immediate danger observed. File shut. Case closed. Samantha, now visibly pregnant with her 5th child, announced plans to leave Winnipeg for the Fisher River Cree Nation, a remote community north of the city where Carl had connections and ties. In April, they packed everything into a battered van. Phoenix was squeezed into the back with the baby, the older boys trailing behind in uncomfortable silence. Their new home was an unfinished house on the reserve, concrete floors that felt cold underfoot, walls too thin to keep out the harsh prairie winds. Phoenix, now 4 years old, explored the basement stairs carefully, her world shrinking down to nothing but echoes and shadows. Life at Fisher River isolated them even further from the outside world. Carl ruled with an iron fist, his anger exploding over the smallest mistakes. Phoenix became his primary target. She was banished to sleep in the cold, unfinished basement on a dirty mattress, surviving on table scraps while others enjoyed full meals. Carl would shoot her with a BB gun for his own twisted amusement, leaving painful welts across her small legs. He created horrifying games with cruel names, choking her until she lost consciousness, her tiny body going limp in his hands. Samantha joined in the torment, striking Phoenix with fists, feet, and metal objects whenever the child cried or had accidents. She forced the little girl to consume things no child should ever have to. The boys in the house witnessed everything. Carl's 12-year-old son stood frozen in terror as his father attacked the girl for something as simple as spilling water, while Samantha watched without intervening. Phoenix's light began to fade. Words rarely passed her lips anymore, her once bright eyes growing dim. Yet, in stolen quiet moments, she would softly hum melodies from nursery rhymes, desperately holding onto tiny pieces of happiness. By June 11th, 2005, the cruelty had reached its breaking point. That evening, after enduring escalating punishments throughout the day, Phoenix was confined to the basement once again. She lay on the frigid concrete floor, vulnerable and trembling. Carl, enraged by her persistent cough, threw her down the stairs where her head struck the hard surface. He attacked her without mercy, as Samantha stood nearby, offering no help. The boy, hiding in a corner, counted each agonizing minute, over 15, until finally, terrible silence fell. Phoenix was gone. Her 5-year-old body had endured more than anyone should ever have to bear. Under the cover of darkness, Carl and Samantha wrapped her in plastic bags and drove to the community landfill, burying her in a shallow grave among the refuse, the ground still damp from recent rains. They returned home and carried on as if nothing had happened, continuing to collect welfare benefits in her name and telling anyone who asked that she was staying with relatives. Their deception lasted for months. The boys were sent back to Winnipeg in July, with CFS arranging their return without asking deeper questions. Samantha and Carl followed in late 2005, settling on McGee Street again. Their second child was born in December. Phoenix's absence went unnoticed. Files gathered dust. No one seemed to realize a little girl was missing. When an aunt made inquiries in August 2005, she received only shrugs. Workers searched their databases but found only outdated information. Then, in March 2006, the truth finally came to light. Carl's sons, now safe with their mother, found the courage to tell police what they had witnessed. Their voices shook as they described the beatings and the burial. When authorities confronted Samantha and Carl, the pair even attempted to pass off another child as Phoenix during a welfare check. Arrested on March 16th, they eventually broke under questioning. Carl led officers to the landfill, where Phoenix's remains were recovered, skeletal, wrapped in plastic, with BB pellets still embedded in her bones. The autopsy confirmed prolonged suffering, ending in severe head trauma. Her death was the culmination of unimaginable cruelty. The arrest sent shockwaves through Winnipeg and Fisher River. Steve Sinclair, now living in Ontario, learned the devastating news through a frantic phone call. He collapsed in grief as he began to understand what had happened during those lost years. Extended family mourned in private, while the community's close bonds were strained by shame and sorrow. Samantha and Carl faced charges of first-degree murder, with the Crown arguing unlawful confinement and deliberate killing. The trial began in November 2008 in Winnipeg's Court of Queen's Bench, unfolding over several weeks in a courtroom heavy with tension. Justice Karen Simonson, presided as jurors heard devastating testimony from the boys, many unable to look directly at the witnesses. Carl admitted to finding Phoenix dead, but claimed he never intended to kill her. Samantha's defense tried to invoke duress, portraying Carl as the true monster, but evidence clearly showed her active participation. Witnesses detailed the systematic abuse, the isolation, the strangulation, the forced degradation. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. On December 12, 2008, the jury convicted both of first-degree murder, sentencing them to life in prison without possibility of parole for 25 years. Their appeals failed in 2010, their guilt permanently etched in law.d. Phoenix's burial in April 2009 at Brookside Cemetery was a quiet ceremony. Her small casket was covered with flowers from relatives, and Steve placed a Phoenix charm on her grave. But her death ignited public outrage, exposing massive systemic failures. Years later, the wounds remain fresh. Steve continues to advocate quietly, his voice a steady call for reform. Samantha, now in her 40s, has sought parole and was granted escorted absences in 2022 for what authorities called healing purposes. But public anger still burns. Carl serves his sentence in isolation. Fisher River honors Phoenix with memorials, reminders of resilience amid devastating loss. Her story has become woven into Manitoba's fabric, underscoring the fragility of childhood, our duty to protect the vulnerable, and the enduring hope that from tragedy, better systems can rise. Story 12. The winter chill of December 1987 hung heavy over Woodbridge, Virginia. This quiet suburb nestled along the Potomac River, where the gentle hum of daily life masked those hidden vulnerabilities that could shatter everything in an instant. On Jefferson Davis Highway, now known as Richmond Highway, the Chevron gas station at 13,152 stood like a beacon for weary travelers and locals alike. Its fluorescent lights cut through the gathering dusk, welcoming anyone who needed fuel or a quick stop. Inside, behind a counter cluttered with cigarette packs and candy bars, worked a woman in her 50s. Her name remains forever shielded from public view, but her routine was as predictable as the ticking clock on the wall. She was the kind of employee who arrived early and stayed late, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of her shifts. A simple anchor in a life that had already weathered its share of storms. She had no way of knowing that on the evening of December 19th, her world would shatter in ways no amount of resilience could prepare her for. The gas station was more than just a workplace. It was a snapshot of the era's quiet normalcy. Cars drifted in sporadically under the canopy, their engines rumbling softly as drivers filled up before heading home through the twilight. The air outside carried the sharp tang of fuel, mixed with the crisp scent of approaching snow, a reminder that the holiday season was upon them. For this woman, that Saturday's shift felt like just another in a string of peaceful hours, broken only by occasional chatter with customers or the familiar sound of the register. She'd come to this job after years of navigating personal hardships, perhaps a divorce or the quiet struggle of single life in a changing America. Here, she'd found stability in its predictability. At 50, she carried a quiet strength. Her hands bore the marks of years of honest work, her eyes holding the wisdom of someone who'd learned to expect little and endure much. As the clock neared closing time, the station emptied out. The last customer drove off into the gathering darkness, leaving only the echo of tires on gravel. She locked the front door, her breath visible in the cold air, and made her way to the small standalone restroom at the edge of the property. It was routine, nothing more. A brief escape from the stuffy interior, a moment of solitude in the crisp night air. The bathroom door creaked open under her hand. The single bulb inside flickered to life, casting harsh shadows on the tiled walls. She stepped inside, completely unaware that eyes had been watching from the shadows beyond the pumps, patient and predatory. Russell Anthony Marabio was 16 years old then, and no stranger to Woodbridge's quiet corners. Born in 1971 in Florida to a family of modest means, he and his identical twin brother, John Arthur, had grown up in a world where their mirrored faces often blurred the lines of identity. The twins were inseparable in their youth, sharing not just features but the chaos of a household marked by instability and frequent moves. Details of their early lives remain sparse, pieced together only in the quiet aftermath of investigation. Russell, like John, was tall and lean with sharp features that made them nearly impossible to tell apart. In 1987, they'd relocated to Virginia with their family, settling into the sprawling anonymity of Prince William County. Russell attended high school there, blending into the crowd of teenagers navigating the complexities of adolescence. That evening, Russell's path crossed hers in a moment of inexplicable darkness. He'd been lingering near the station, perhaps drawn by its isolation or the vulnerability it presented. The restroom, detached from the main building, offered seclusion, a forgotten corner beneath the highway's distant roar. As she entered, he followed. His footsteps were silent against the concrete. In his hand, a knife caught the dim light, a common pocket blade, but sharp enough to terrorize. The door clicked shut behind him, trapping her in that confined space. She turned, surprise widening her eyes. But before any sound could escape, the blade was at her throat, its cold edge demanding silence. Time seemed to slow in that tiny room, the air thick with fear. He moved with calculated swiftness, using strips of duct tape he prepared to silence and bind her. The tape was rough against her skin, turning her cries into muffled whimpers. She struggled, her body fighting against the unyielding tiles. But he was stronger. His youth fueled a terrible efficiency. What followed was brutal and invasive, a profound violation that stripped away her dignity in the most devastating way. The assault was completely random, as prosecutors would later emphasize. No prior connection, no grudge, just the cruel opportunism of a stranger's darkness. When it ended, he vanished into the shadows, leaving her bound and broken. The tape clung to her skin like a second layer of torment, her body aching from the violence. Minutes stretched into what felt like eternity as she fought against her restraints, her mind reeling with terror and disbelief. How could this happen here, in a place she knew so well? Finally, with trembling hands, she managed to free herself enough to stumble back to the station, her clothes disheveled, her face streaked with tears. She called the police, her voice shaking as she recounted the horror to the dispatcher, each word a Herculean effort. Officers arrived swiftly, their cruiser lights piercing the darkness like accusatory beacons. The scene was secured. The restroom was scoured for evidence, tape fragments carefully collected, her clothing bagged with precision. At the hospital, a physical evidence recovery kit was administered. The invasive swabs and examinations, a necessary but excruciating extension of her trauma. Medical staff moved with clinical precision, documenting bruises, cuts, and the profound physical toll. A male DNA profile was extracted from the samples, a technological promise in an era when forensics was still evolving. But databases were limited, matches elusive, with no witnesses or suspect description beyond a vague silhouette, a white male, average build. The trail went cold almost immediately. For the woman, the immediate aftermath became a blur of shock and survival. She returned home to a small apartment in Woodbridge, the walls closing in with memories she couldn't escape. Nights became battles against nightmares. Days were shadowed by the fear of stepping outside. She confided in a few close friends, her voice barely above a whisper, but the weight of secrecy bore down on her. Society in 1987 offered little in the way of support for survivors. Therapy was stigmatized, and the shame clung like the tape had to her skin. She continued working at the station for a time, each shift a test of courage. But the restroom remained off limits, a haunted relic. Over the years, she rebuilt fragments of her life, perhaps finding solace in family or quiet hobbies like gardening. But the unresolved pain lingered, a constant undercurrent of what-ifs and unhealed wounds. Meanwhile, Russell Marabio slipped back into obscurity. The family moved frequently after high school, the twins pursuing parallel paths in Florida. They took jobs in construction or manual labor, living unremarkable lives in Palatka and Deltona, towns where the humid air and sprawling lots mirrored their intertwined fates. Russell married, had children, and maintained a facade of normalcy, his past buried deep. John, equally enigmatic, shared in this quiet existence, their identical natures making it impossible for outsiders to tell them apart. No one suspected the shadow that Russell carried, the impulse of that December night, dormant but indelible. Decades passed. The case file gathered dust in the Prince William County Police Archives. The 1990s brought advancements in DNA technology, but without a match, it remained one of thousands of cold cases, a statistic in the grim ledger of unsolved violence. The victim, now in her 70s by the 2010s, had aged with grace, but not without cost. Her hair grayed, her steps slowed. Yet, the incident defined a fracture in her spirit. She spoke of it rarely, to a therapist perhaps, or in the solitude of her thoughts, wondering if justice would ever come. The world moved on. Technology boomed. Society grappled with new crises. But for her, time circled back to that restroom, the echo of footsteps haunting her quiet days. It was in 2019 that the embers reignited. Prince William County's Cold Case Unit, under the steady hand of Master Detectives Jonia Pinedo and Colleen Gratham, turned their focus to long-forgotten files. The unit was a beacon of persistence, dedicated to breathing life into stories silenced by time. Pinedo, with her keen analytical mind honed from years on the force, and Gratham, whose empathy drove her to connect with survivors, selected this case for its potential. They reached out to the victim, now retired and living modestly, her voice steady but laced with the residue of pain. "We've never stopped looking," Gratham told her over the phone. The words a lifeline across the years. The woman agreed to reopen the wound, her resolve hardened by decades of waiting. The detectives dove in, resubmitting the 1987 evidence to the Virginia Department of Forensic Science. Modern testing refined the DNA profile, yielding a clearer male signature from the kit. But the breakthrough came from genetic genealogy, a cutting-edge tool that traced ancestry through public databases. They sent a cutting from the victim's underwear to the Marshall University Forensic Science Center, where experts extracted familial links. The results pointed to Florida, to two brothers, John Arthur Marabio and Russell Anthony Marabio, identical twins in their late 40s. The detectives' pulses quickened. This was a lead, but the identical DNA posed a riddle forensics had rarely solved. With cooperation from Florida authorities, buccal swabs were obtained from both men under the guise of routine inquiries. Their surprise was evident, but compliance was given. The DNA samples matched the crime scene evidence perfectly, confirming that one or both twins had been there that night. But here's the problem. Identical twins share nearly 100% of their genetic code. With standard testing methods, telling them apart is scientifically impossible. The case hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of collapse. The victim's hope flickered like a dying flame as lawyers debated whether pursuing the case was even ethical. Petto and Gratham refused to give up. Their late nights spent poring over reports became a testament to their unwavering commitment to finding the truth. In August 2022, they reached out to Parabon Nanolabs in Reston, Virginia, a true pioneer in forensic innovation. Parabon's team, led by experts like Director of Bioinformatics Ellen Graytack, embraced this seemingly impossible challenge. Here's what they knew. Identical twins begin as a single zygote that splits early in development. But something remarkable happens after that split. Somatic mutations, tiny genetic errors that accumulate over time, create subtle differences between the twins. These mutations are incredibly rare, like finding a single snowflake in a raging storm. They occur in roughly 8 places across the 3 billion base pairs that make up our human genome. Using deep whole genome sequencing, a process that scans every single nucleotide and advanced bioinformatics, the lab began dissecting the twin samples. The analysis was painstakingly meticulous. Machines hummed through countless nights as algorithms sifted through data, searching for the tiniest anomalies. Then came the breakthrough. They compared the mutations directly to that 1987 evidence, isolating unique markers in Russell's DNA that aligned perfectly with the crime scene. John's profile diverged just enough to completely exonerate him. It was groundbreaking, the first time in us courts that somatic mutation analysis had pierced through the veil of twin identity. Graytech later reflected on just how rare these differences are, her words underscoring the incredible precision of this science. These tiny differences, born from embryonic chance, had waited decades to finally speak their truth. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, detectives moved swiftly. On June 23, 2023, Russell Marabito was arrested in Palatka, Florida. The handcuffs formed a stark contrast against his quiet, unassuming life. He was 52 now, his face lined by the years, but that twin resemblance was still unmistakably striking. Extradited back to Virginia, he faced charges of abduction and assault. The indictment read like a resurrection of 1987's nightmare. Despite prosecutors' strong objections, he was released on bond and returned to Florida, the crushing weight of an impending trial hanging over him. His family, completely blindsided, struggled to grapple with this shocking revelation. John, cleared but forever linked to the case, maintained his silence. His life would always be marked by this association. The trial unfolded in Prince William County's Circuit Court during the sweltering summer of 25. The August heat seemed to mirror the tension crackling through that courtroom. Commonwealth's attorney Amy Ashworth, a seasoned prosecutor with a well-earned reputation for tenacity, led the case. She was methodical and precise, weaving science and human story together into a powerful tapestry of justice. The victim, now 88 years old, took the stand. Her voice was frail, but absolutely unwavering. Dressed simply, she recounted that terrible night in measured tones, every member of the jury hanging on her every word. Tears welled in her eyes as she described the fear, the isolation, the decades of unanswered questions that had haunted her. "I thought I'd take it to my grave," she admitted, her eyes meeting Ashworth's in a moment of shared resolve. Ashworth presented the evidence with crystal clarity, carefully explaining this DNA odyssey for a jury completely unfamiliar with genomics. Expert witnesses from Parabon detailed the sequencing process, using diagrams to illustrate how these mutations work like invisible fingerprints. Graytech testified with calm authority, her composed demeanor underscoring the method's validity. Peer-reviewed and battle-tested in laboratories worldwide, defense attorneys challenged the novelty of the science, arguing that it was too new, too untested. But the judge admitted the evidence, marking a true legal milestone. Russell sat stoically throughout, his twin notably absent, though his shadow felt omnipresent in that courtroom. He offered no confession, his silence forming a fortress against the mounting evidence. The deliberations stretched deep into the evening of August 21st, 2025. The jury carefully weighed the victim's powerful testimony against the irrefutable genetic evidence. When the verdict finally came, guilty on all counts, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Ashworth's office hailed it as a true landmark case, the first U.S. conviction to successfully distinguish identical twins through somatic mutation analysis. Bond was immediately revoked. Russell was remanded into custody, his face remaining impassive as deputies led him away. Sentencing loomed on November 7th, with the possibility of life in prison. A fitting end to 38 years of evasion. For the victim, closure arrived like a long-withheld exhale she'd been holding for decades. In the days that followed, she spoke with Gratham and Peto, gratitude mingling with deep sorrow. "It's over," she said simply, those words carrying profound weight. The detectives, exhausted but deeply fulfilled, added another solved case to their ledger. A powerful reminder that persistence can bridge even the longest decades. Russell's family navigated the devastating fallout. John's exoneration felt like a bittersweet reprieve. In Woodbridge, that old gas station has long since been torn down, and the highway rushes on as always. But this story lingers, standing as a testament to both science's incredible reach and human endurance. Yet this narrative doesn't simply end in that courtroom. It echoes through the broader tapestry of justice's ongoing evolution. This case spotlighted genetic genealogy's immense power, raising important debates about privacy and ethics as these databases continue to grow. For survivors everywhere, it offered something precious: hope. No crime is too old, no evidence too faint. The woman whose life was forever altered finally found her measure of peace. Her strength immortalized not in tragedy but in triumph over it. As autumn leaves fell in 2025, Woodbridge breathed easier. The shadows of 1987 finally dispersed by light long in coming. The emotional undercurrents ran deep, weaving through families and communities. Picture the victim's daughter, if she had one, hearing the news after years of hushed conversations. Her mother's burden lightened at last. Or Russell's children, grappling with the father's hidden darkness, their world shattered by revelations from decades past. These human threads, though undocumented, underscore the case's true resonance, a ripple effect from one night's terror. As sentencing approached, Ashworth prepared her recommendation, emphasizing the victim's enduring pain. 38 years, she would say, is far too long for anyone to wait. The judge, weighing precedents, faced a decision that could set new legal tides. In the end, the case of Russell Marabio wasn't just about DNA evidence. It was about reclaiming stolen agency, proving that even the most elusive truths could eventually surface. Through it all, the narrative pulsed with quiet suspense. Cold trails suddenly blazing hot. The twins mirrored mystery. The courtroom's tense climax. Emotionally, it pulled at the heart. A woman's quiet courage meeting justice's relentless pursuit. In retelling this story, we honor the facts while immersing ourselves in the stakes, without exaggeration. A tale of human fragility meeting unyielding resolve.